Muito bom dia, sejam bem-vindos à Conferência Digital Inovação em Saúde, não deixar ninguém para trás, uma iniciativa conjunta da Associação Portuguesa da Indústria Farmacêutica, a APIFARMA, e da Federação Europeia da Indústria Farmacêutica, em parceria com o Expresso. No âmbito da presidência portuguesa da União Europeia, a APIFARMA desenvolveu o projeto Liderança Europeia na Saúde, não deixar ninguém para trás, que inclui um conjunto de iniciativas de caráter público com o objetivo de reforçar o compromisso das empresas da indústria farmacêutica para mais e melhor saúde para todos os cidadãos europeus. Esta conferência marca apenas o início dessa série de iniciativas que irão decorrer até ao final do mês de junho. Vamos reunir, por isso, nas próximas horas, vários especialistas nacionais e internacionais que irão procurar debater soluções para transformar a saúde numa prioridade europeia. Durante esta manhã iremos discutir o tema da competitividade na Europa, o acesso aos cuidados de saúde e a investigação e desenvolvimento de inovação na área da saúde. Motivos mais que suficientes para nos acompanhar online ao longo das horas que se seguem. A conferência pode ser acompanhada em direto no site da APIFARMA, em www.apifarma.pt, com tradução em simultâneo para inglês e também no Facebook do Expresso. Esta é, aliás, uma conferência internacional, vista Europa fora, pelo que terá 3 painéis totalmente em inglês. Mas para nos dar as boas-vindas, tenho já aqui ao meu lado João Almeida Lopes, o presidente da direção da APIFARMA. Muito bom dia.
Bom dia a todos. Senhor Secretário de Estado da Saúde, caro Dr. Diogo Serras Lopes, em representação também da Senhora Ministra da Saúde, Doutora Marta Temido. Em si, cumprimentamos todos os que acompanham esta conferência digital dedicada à inovação em saúde. Por ocasião da presidência portuguesa do Conselho da União Europeia, a APIFARMA colocou em movimento o programa Liderança Europeia na Saúde, não deixar ninguém para trás. O projeto inclui um conjunto de iniciativas de caráter público, com o objetivo de reforçar o compromisso das empresas da indústria farmacêutica para mais e melhor saúde para todos os cidadãos europeus. Não deixar ninguém para trás. A iniciativa de hoje, realizada em parceria com a FPIA, a Federação Europeia da Indústria Farmacêutica, procura debater e procurar soluções que promovam a competitividade da Europa, o acesso aos cuidados de saúde e a investigação e desenvolvimento de inovação na área da saúde. Para uma Europa mais global, mais resiliente, mais equitativa, mais digital e mais sustentável. Permitam-nos recuar um pouco. A pandemia Covid-19 constitui uma visita indesejável, que deixou bem patente a importância da saúde para as pessoas, para a sociedade e para a economia global. Nos últimos 120 anos, as inovações em saúde, as vacinas, os antibióticos, o diagnóstico, o saneamento, a nutrição, entre outros, salvaram milhões de vidas e continuam a ser um poderoso catalisador de progresso económico e social. Mais recentemente, o foco no aumento dos custos da saúde tem dominado o debate político, enquanto que a saúde, como um investimento na vida e no bem-estar das pessoas, tem estado ausente da discussão. A verdade é que o choque sem precedentes provocado pela pandemia recentrou o debate e conferiu uma visão verdadeiramente holística à saúde. A indústria farmacêutica continua a contribuir diariamente para que os cidadãos sejam cada vez mais saudáveis, tenham mais anos de vida e com mais qualidade. Hoje são bem evidentes os benefícios da cooperação entre os organismos públicos, sociais e a iniciativa privada, ao permitir uma resposta articulada não só no combate ao desafio pandémico, mas também na contenção dos seus efeitos colaterais. Não tenhamos dúvidas, a capacidade de resposta da Europa à atual e a futuras ameaças sanitárias será tanto mais eficaz quanto maior for a nossa capacidade de afirmar este imenso território como centro de excelência para a prática das ciências da vida. A Presidente da Comissão Europeia, Ursula von der Leyen, disse em dezembro passado no discurso do Estado da União, quote, temos de ter a certeza que a Europa pode rapidamente desenvolver e aplicar soluções para a próxima crise da saúde. Não podemos estar mais de acordo. De facto, a indústria farmacêutica está empenhada neste objetivo comum de contribuir para afirmar a liderança da Europa na área das ciências da vida. O sucesso deste nosso compromisso beneficiará a vida e a longevidade dos europeus, a qualidade com que vivemos os nossos dias e a expectativa de um futuro melhor. Podemos e queremos contribuir para este debate, a bem de um futuro coletivo com mais e melhor vida. Por isso, aqui estamos a debater o papel da indústria da saúde na recuperação da União Europeia no pós-Covid-19, o acesso e a acessibilidade, como beneficiar do impacto total da ciência nos resultados em saúde dos doentes, como pode a União Europeia assumir a liderança. Importa não fugir do essencial. No que respeita à indústria, permitam-nos referir que o plano de recuperação e resiliência reconhece corretamente que, em termos estratégicos, uma indústria forte e baseada no conhecimento é fundamental para a recuperação económica e para uma resposta eficaz aos novos desafios societais. Mais, salienta como a necessidade de apostar na industrialização e na inovação se tornou ainda mais relevante no contexto da atual pandemia, identificando a saúde como uma peça-chave para reforçar a autonomia estratégica dos Estados-membros e da União, a aumentar a resiliência económica e reduzir a dependência externa e os riscos de disrupções nas cadeias de valor. A importância da saúde é hoje clara e é assumida por toda a sociedade. Quanto mais prioridade conferirmos à saúde, mais sucesso terá a nossa receita para a prosperidade. A Europa e os sistemas de saúde vivem um momento que nos convoca a todos. Só uma melhor cooperação entre todas as partes interessadas permitirá responder eficazmente e com o sentido de urgência adequado. Para isso, há que investir no diálogo e na cooperação. Por uma Europa mais resiliente que reforce a sua competitividade rumo a uma posição de liderança na inovação científica. Por uma Europa mais social e justa, onde os cidadãos tenham acesso equitativo aos melhores cuidados de saúde, incluindo a prevenção, o diagnóstico, os medicamentos, as vacinas, assegurando a sustentabilidade dos sistemas de saúde dos Estados-membros. Por uma Europa onde a saúde digital e os dados em saúde concorram para aumentar o acesso e a qualidade dos cuidados de saúde. Por uma Europa mais verde, comprometida com um impacto positivo na vida dos cidadãos e no ambiente. Por uma Europa global, com capacidade para responder aos desafios de saúde e assegurar uma abordagem solidária e aberta ao mundo. É este o nosso compromisso comum. É esta a nossa agenda comum. Estamos prontos para trabalhar com todos para responder às necessidades de todas as pessoas. Não deixar ninguém para trás. Desejo a todos uma boa conferência. Muito obrigado.
João Almeida Lopes, muito obrigado. Sei que vai ser o nosso espectador mais atento e no final teremos a oportunidade de falar consigo novamente sobre as conclusões do que aqui fomos discutindo ao longo da manhã. Seguimos com a intervenção do Secretário de Estado da Saúde, Diogo Serras Lopes, em representação da Sra. Ministra da Saúde, Marta Temido.
Bom dia a todos neste Dia Mundial da Saúde. Quero agradecer à APIFARMA o convite que tão gentilmente endereçou ao Ministério da Saúde para esta conferência Inovação em Saúde, não deixar ninguém para trás. Não deixar ninguém para trás significa que todos os cidadãos europeus têm acesso aos tratamentos e medicamentos que necessitam. Ou seja, por um lado que todas as necessidades têm uma resposta médica, e isso apenas se consegue promovendo a inovação e o desenvolvimento em saúde. Por outro lado, que os cidadãos têm capacidade para pagar essa resposta. E isto consegue-se através do equilíbrio certo entre inovação e acessibilidade. Nesta linha, a presidência portuguesa da União Europeia pretende prosseguir uma agenda europeia assente no acesso sustentável e universal aos medicamentos. Em linha com a estratégia farmacêutica, a Europa deverá garantir o abastecimento de medicamentos essenciais, evitando a sua escassez. Uma ação para a qual Portugal pode e deve contribuir, estimulando a sua própria capacidade produtiva e reforçando a sua cadeia de abastecimento. Este esforço de melhorar o acesso à saúde deverá ser conjunto. Se algo que esta pandemia nos ensinou é que apenas conseguimos superar os nossos maiores desafios quando o fazemos juntos. Uma das maiores concretizações disso mesmo, creio, é o enorme esforço que foi realizado, a uma escala nunca antes vista, para combater a pandemia de Covid-19. Pela primeira vez, os líderes de vários países e os principais players da saúde assumiram o compromisso de trabalhar em conjunto para acelerar o desenvolvimento e a produção de vacinas, testes e tratamentos para a Covid-19 e garantir o acesso em todo o mundo aos mesmos. O desafio aqui foi o de acelerar e harmonizar os processos para garantir que, uma vez que os produtos fossem considerados seguros e eficazes, estes pudessem ser levados aos milhões de pessoas que no mundo necessitam deles. Houve um esforço enorme por parte dos cientistas e também das empresas de reprogramar e de redefinir a prioridade das suas investigações e operações para enfrentar esta pandemia, simultaneamente garantindo que também os outros medicamentos, os medicamentos que não são para a Covid-19, não parariam nunca de chegar aos pacientes que deles dependem. E assim conseguimos ter uma vacina em tempo recorde. Basta pensar que, desde que foi detectado o primeiro caso de Covid-19 em Portugal até a inoculação da primeira vacina, houve um intervalo de apenas 9 meses, de março até dezembro. Uma conquista que nos permite, à data de hoje, ter cerca de 13% da população portuguesa inoculada com pelo menos uma dose de vacina. E claro que teríamos de conseguir isto juntos, porque só assim se conseguirá erradicar a doença. Porque um país de nada adianta conseguir vacinar toda a sua população se os outros países não conseguirem também a sua própria imunidade de grupo. Também na inovação, este tem de ser um esforço coletivo. Por isso mesmo, no domínio da saúde digital, a presidência portuguesa vai trabalhar para alargar o intercâmbio de informação existente entre os Estados-membros, com vista a contribuir para a criação do Espaço Europeu de Dados de Saúde. O foco deste Espaço Europeu é dado ao desenvolvimento das competências digitais dos cidadãos, em particular dos profissionais de saúde, à promoção de melhores infraestruturas de armazenamento e tratamento de dados de saúde e à criação de um quadro jurídico e regulamentar que permita o fornecimento de dados de saúde para determinados fins. Um tema sempre complexo, mas que precisa efetivamente que consigamos avançar nele. Destaque também para a necessidade de um melhor intercâmbio de dados entre os países. Para combater os desafios das novas variantes do SARS-CoV-2, as respostas mais eficazes continuarão a ser as abordagens de teste e rastreamento, incluindo forte vigilância e sequenciamento dos genomas. Será necessário aumentar a vigilância e a capacidade de detecção, para identificar qualquer nova estirpe o mais cedo possível, a fim de controlar a sua disseminação e investir no desenvolvimento de vacinas que possam dar uma resposta adaptada. Para isso, é vital que haja uma estrutura harmonizada para registro de pacientes e doenças, bem como um sólido sistema de dados de saúde. Para terminar, queria apenas reforçar esta nota de que, para ninguém ficar para trás, temos de aprender a trabalhar melhor em conjunto, com recurso a tecnologias mais inovadoras e melhores processos, com risco de, se isso não acontecer, aumentarmos ainda mais a lacuna entre os países e deixar que aqueles que têm menos recursos fiquem ainda mais frágeis. Isto é particularmente crítico quando falamos do acesso à saúde, algo que todos concordamos é ser primordial para toda a gente. Muito obrigado.
Agradecemos esta mensagem em vídeo do Diogo Serras Lopes, secretário de Estado da Saúde, que nos foi enviada para o arranque dos trabalhos desta manhã. E como referi há pouco na introdução, a partir de agora vamos falar em inglês, porque parte dos participantes nos painéis acompanham-nos de fora de Portugal e acredito que muitos dos que nos estão a ver também por essa Europa fora entenderão melhor assim a mensagem. It's now time to introduce our first keynote speaker, Dennis Ostwald, CEO and founder of Y4 Institute, that will give us a perspective about health industry's role in European Union recovery post-COVID-19. Dennis Ostwald, good morning, welcome. You can start your presentation.
Good morning, thank you for the invitation. My name is Dennis Ostwald. I'm the CEO of Y4 Institute based in Germany, and I'm happy to present today my presentation to you. And I think the most important topic is, if we don't want to leave someone alone or no one behind us, then we need to understand that health, create a new understanding about health. Health is an investment and it's not a cost factor. I want to talk today about the rationale, about the impacts of health investment in Europe in COVID times. Next slide, please. First of all, we have a structure of 4 chapters. Health as the driver of growth, innovation, and wealth. Then I want to point out the health economic reporting, that health is which shows that health is an investment. And then I would like to point out that industrial health economy is the backbone of the health economy. And last but not least, I want to close with a conclusion and policy implications. I hear a lot of voices in the background. Can you hear me very good?
I hope you
Next
can
slide,
hear
please.
as well.
Just a sentence about WIFO. WIFO is a think tank, a European or worldwide think tank with 4 different locations, one in Germany, in Greece, in Ireland, and the US. And we are at more than 50 employees and conducted more than 360 projects for companies, associations, and ministries. Next slide, please. Health as a driver of growth and innovation and wealth. Now we are facing one of the biggest challenges. The corona pandemic is having a significant impact on the economy. We have the challenge that the EU 27 GDP dropped by minus 6.4%. Nevertheless, the impact of health is huge. So we calculated that 10% of the GVAs, or so the GDP, or the European GDP, is covered from the health investments. 12% are related to the labor market in the European economy. With 242 billion, only the health industry, so the industrial health economy, contributes to the European GDP. Almost 3 million employees are working in this subsector of the health economy in the EU. So we see it has an important impact. And furthermore, the corona impact highlights the need to safeguard the innovative strengths of such leading industries in the industrial health economy. So we need to spotlight this in the future. And that's also the reason that we need a sustainable investment in R&D. Next slide, please. Post-COVID, I hope not, but pretty sure governments will aim to keep costs down again. They will try to cut costs also in health, but also other budgets. But we need to increase or stabilize the investment in health as an example to achieve the SDG goals. The SDGs goal 3 means ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. And WHO estimates that we need a new investment up to 371 billion only per year, only for lower and middle income countries. Health expenditures, recent publications in Lancet point out that the health expenditures globally will increase up to 11 trillion by 2030. Is this a problem? No, I don't think so. We need to, next slide, please. We need to foster a paradigm shift. We need to see this expenditures as an investment, and we see how it increased in the last last year due to the drop in GDP. We have an increase in the ratio of health expenditures in comparison to the GDP. But, and then next slide, please. We can point out that this contributes 9.3% of the global GDP. So there is a return on investment. It's not only expenditures, it's GDP contribution, it's wealth, it's employment for the world. And just to point it out, it's nearly every 10th euro of our wealth is contributed by health. In the EU, it's nearly 9.6% of the overall economy, which sums up to $1.6 billion US. And we are employing only in Europe nearly 28 million people in the healthcare sector, which means 12% or 12.5% of the overall economy. Maybe that's the reason why the German health minister asked how his investments helps to stabilize the German economy, right? Next slide, please. And we are not alone with this point. Also the WHO mentioned that health investment is the smartest investment. It pays off. And I like to do or give the comparison to education sometimes. Everyone will be aligned to say that investment in education is smart. And I also think that's very smart. But what is education without health? And so we have to invest in both. And one other aspect, if you invest in health, it pays off quicker than if you invest in education. Next slide, please. The health economy reporting is a starting point of our initiative to foster the paradigm shift that health is an investment and not a cost factor. Next slide, please. We started in 2009 with the German Ministry of Affairs and Energy. They wanted to measure what the impact of the health expenditures to the German economy. And over the years, we developed different metrics to measure the different aspects of the health economy in Germany. And in 2018, 19, and 20, we leveraged these calculations to different countries in the world. Next slide, please. That's the most important slide, in my opinion. We need to point out that the past was healthcare, considering healthcare as a cost factor. The future is that health economy is a driver for growth, employment, exports, imports, but also for better health. Next slide, please. Here, I talked a lot about the health economy. Here is the definition of it. We worked with statistical authorities on to define the scope of the health economy. So one part is the industrial health economy. The other part is the healthcare economy with dentists, physicians, and all this stuff. And then we have also some service and support areas. So it's a next slide, please. It's a very heterogeneous sector. And now I want to put a spotlight on the industrial health economy, which is, in my opinion, the backbone of the health economy. Why it's a backbone? We can see it right now. First, it helps to create a better efficiency along the value chain of healthcare. Secondly, new therapies and new innovative drugs may help to reduce necessary investments along the value chain in the future. And so, especially in the COVID time, we have seen that it's a very innovative sector within the health economy. It's a miracle, in my opinion, that we can vaccinate individuals after 9 months. That's really incredible. Next slide, please. Here, the good thing in the health economy, because reporting is that because it's based on the national accounting system, that we can compare it also to other sectors. Because in my opinion, it's worth to do so, that you point out health economy makes 10% of the European GDP. If you compare it to the automotive industry, it's 1/4 out of it. Or information communication services, one fourth. Or it's double as much as the finance and insurance sector in total. So we talk about a sector which is really, really huge, and 12.4% of the labor market. And compare the labor market effects, which create wealth again, right? Because if people are employed, they are also paying to social security systems and so on. But it's really a huge sector. Next slide, please. And only the industrial health economy contributes with 18%. That means 242 billion euro to GDP, to the European GDP. Or 10% of the entire workforce is working in the industrial health economy, which means 2.9 million people are employed in this high innovative sector. And it's a sector for the future, right? Next slide, please. And here, some comparisons also not only within the health economy within Europe, but also to other countries. And you can see how different the health economy is structured in the different countries. You can see that the share of gross value added in the industrial health economy to overall economy is in Germany 2.6%, in Switzerland is 7.3%, in Ireland 8.3%. So and it's interesting to see over the years how it's kind of not only the competition but where the value chains moved, right, along Europe but also worldwide. Next slide, please. What are my conclusions and policy implications? Next slide, please. First of all, if we really want to foster a paradigm shift that health is an investment and it's smart to invest in health, then we also need to answer the question, what is the return on all this investment? And that's the reason why we think, and it's important, that we have a new objective dialogue between politicians, associations, and companies. We need to establish an evidence-based monitoring tool to support decision-making of economic and health policymakers. So we need to implement matrices so that politicians, associations, and companies can discuss about the development of different figures. We need to point out strengths and weaknesses of the sector. So we need to do it, we need to compare it with important other sectors of the economy, because there will be always a question where to invest in. And I hope that this will be a macroeconomic impact assessment for future health policy decisions. In Germany, sometimes the questions pop up. I hope that these questions will pop up also in other economies in the world in the next years. Next slide, please. And that's one important point. We shouldn't think anymore about silos. We should think about a value chain of healthcare, right? Where everyone is interacting. We need to increase investments in health, in industrial health economy, especially in R&D. We need to strengthen the health value chain. We need to consider also the positive effects next to the health economy, to the overall economy, like multiplier effects and such things. And the most important, so that no citizen is left behind, we need to improve our healthcare and must provide the best possible health for everyone. Next slide, please. And that's the way I'm really proud about it, that we have been allowed to work on such a paper with Harvard University and several other partners. This matrix is a suggestion to G20, and the title is, if we can't measure it, we can't fix it. And we hope that this impulse will help to implement different matrices in different countries in the world. First of all, we need to establish the health economy reporting. We need to consider the overall value chain, and in the health economy, we break silo. We need to break silos. We can measure the spillover effects of health economy to other sectors. And last but not least, we have also to measure the social impact of health investment into the economy to the different patients. Next slide, please. And that's the reason why we also consider, I started in the beginning, that there is a SDG 3 goal, but we have to put the entire health economy in the spotlight of the entire SDGs. In part, and we can already deliver some of the answers to the different impact categories or dimensions. And I think we need also to consider the environmental part of the health economy and the social part. Next slide, please. And that's the reason why I really appreciate the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe by the European Commission. And next slide, also that FPI is pushing this topic ahead. Please, next slide. You can see also the industrial pharmaceutical strategy, which is created by FPR. And I really like these initiatives because these are in line with our ideas. And thank you for your time. And please, as takeaways, 10% of the European GDP is related to health investments. 12% of the employees working in this sector, and the health and 3 million people only work in the health industry. That's amazing. Thank you very much, and that I was allowed to present my ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis Odsvald, for your presentation. It was very important for the discussion we're going to have in the next minutes. To comment on this first session, we are pleased to welcome Manuel Pizarro, member of European Parliament and member of the Committee of Environment, Public Health and Food Safety, and also Paul Portas here by my side, Vice President of the Board of Portuguese Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you so much both for being with us. Manuel Pizarro, I will start with you. Despite the political willingness to attract pharma industry in the European Union, we keep seeing investment and innovation advancing faster in the United States and also in China. Do you identify competitive disadvantages for the EU that justify this trend?
Well, good morning. Thank you for the invitation. I've been asked to speak in Portuguese, but I don't know if you prefer that I speak in Portuguese or in...
To me, you can speak in Portuguese, but I was told that we should speak in English in these three panels because of all the viewers we are having abroad Europe. But if you prefer to do in Portuguese, there will be an English translation.
Well, I will try to do that in English, and we will see how that's going. Well, thank you for the question. I think that the study that was presented is a very, very important study, and it points out for the important question of the economical importance of the health sector. As we work in health sector, and we are always telling to the politicians for the other sectors, to the people, that that we need to strengthen the economic sector on health. And for a country like ours, with a peripheral position in the EU, it's clear that if we don't develop the economical sector in health, we cannot achieve to assure high quality health services to all our citizens. And this is very important, and I must point out this is the main frame of that session, is how to assure that no one is left behind. I think that at the European level, the Corona crisis point out the difficulties that we face, mostly because we create a large dependence on outside logistics chains, sometimes very complex logistics chains, and we need to fix that. So I think it's very important to embrace the pharmaceutical strategy and the industrial strategy for Europe. I think that one of the main problems is that we have a very difficult regulatory system. And as we are seeing in vaccination process and in the authorizations for vaccines. And I think that we must deal with that. How can we assure safety of products and the innovation, and at the same time, how can we accelerate and simplify the regulatory process? I think this is perhaps the most important challenge that we have in the immediate terms. Secondly, I think that we need to reinforce even more the European investment in innovation, in research and development. Of course, we have the Horizon Europe, but we should reinforce the Horizon Europe, and we should also put more and more attention in the EU for Health, a new health program at the European level, which has a 5.1 billion euros budget, which is not so much, but is, however, 26 times more than the previous budget in the ancient MFF, which ends in the 2020. So I think this is perhaps the two most important questions: accelerate and simplify regulatory procedures, and invest in supporting R&D and health systems. the third question, the importance of data. In Europe, we really need to develop health data European space. And I think this is perhaps the most important thing that immediately the Portuguese presidency of the European Union can achieve. Thank you very much. I will stay in touch for other comments.
Of course, we'll have other questions for you. For now, we're going to Paul Porter here by my side. Why is it so difficult to attract investment in these areas for the European Union?
So, good morning. Thank you also to Professor Ostwald. And I would love to start with a tribute to the pharma industry. As a citizen, I must pay tribute to the unprecedented effort to provide a safe exit from this pandemic through vaccines. Usually we would need 10 years to get one, and in less than 1 year, and with a lot of setbacks and achievements, with parallel lives between search, regulation, and production, if we have an exit, a safe exit, this is due to private and public investment on pharma, first of all. I don't see it's sufficiently mentioned, okay? So, the second thing is, one of the critical, if you consider geostrategy, we know, as Professor Ostwald and Manuel said, how relevant is the health sector on the European economy, how well placed is the strong investment of pharma industry. I think 15%, around 15% of their net sales on innovation. But if you consider the world geostrategy, and by the way, everything Manuel said will be tougher, larger, and more urgent because we are becoming an older and older continent with more life expectancy. So we have more and more elderly people, and that will change the demand and the offer on the health economy. But this said, one, if you consider the competition between Europe, United States of America, and Asia, we have some real reasons to be worried. In 2016, I think, or 2017, China overcame European Union on level of R&D investment on the GDP. Nobody noticed it, but they overcome the plus of 2.16, if I remember well, and this is a trend for the future. China recently announced that an increase of 7% per year of their innovation budgets will be a mandatory policy. So we lack more private investment and more public investment on R&D. If we want to get closer to the United States, we have both a problem on the private side, but mainly on the public side. The second thing is, are we enough attractive to retain and innovate in Europe? That is a matter of discussion on taxation policies, labor policies, science, university, and corporations, integration and cooperation policies. So
we need to change all that.
We need to change all that. No, we need to increase our level of, look, João, the critical source of the future of our economic framework is innovation. We don't have innovation. The good framework for innovation is the alliance between science and capital, capitals and scientists. If we have a safe way to exit COVID, it's because we achieved that alliance between capital, private, and public. By the way, more private than public currently, between corporate pharma industry, scientists, universities, labs. This is the critical source of our development in the future. So we have to increase the levels and the ambitions on how much we spend on R&D and how practical is the service, how practical is the result of that investment, how close to the economic world. Okay. By the way, just to mention two things, if I may.
Of course.
As Europeans, we cannot be satisfied with EU performance in this struggle. But we must be honest, else is not a common European policy. I remember end of 2019, Ursula von der Leyen was finishing the building of her commission. Health portfolio was not first, second, or third option to non-country because it had no attributions. So we had to face pandemics without a European health common policy. Are we close to have, on lessons learned, a European common policy on health? I have my doubts. It's very complex, but at least we should establish as lessons learned that we have to share responsibilities as in a European level on facing exceptional and emergency pandemic phenomena. We have to share responsibilities at a European level, and at the same time, as a trade-off, we need a much more efficient bureaucracy,
and we are not
at
doing
a European level on this matter.
On your opinion. Let's talk with Manuel Pizarro again, that is listening. As do you agree with Paulo Portas about this necessity of network joining the industry, the academia, and the healthcare institutions?
I think that the vaccination program showed clearly that we really need that. We really need to facilitate the contacts between the scientists and between the industry. And of course, industry means also capitals, even if they are private or public capitals. However, I must say that when we speak about investment in R&D, we should not focus only in the investment in things that could be immediately used by the industry. For instance, in the technologies that were used in some of the new vaccines against SARS-CoV-2, those who are produced by Pfizer or by AstraZeneca, they used mRNA-based technologies that have been investigated in the last 20 years. So if we want innovative results coming from R&D that can be translated to products that people can use and can benefit, we should invest in all the R&D system. And I fully agree with Paulo. This is very concerning that we are investing more in Europe, but the process is being more accelerated in other areas of the globe. So we cannot be completely happy about what we are doing. I want to also comment something. Yes, it's true that there is not health policy, a common health policy in Europe. But I think that perhaps all the politicians should hear the citizens, because in the last Eurostat published in March this year, 83% of citizens in Europe want more European Union in the health sector. When Mrs. von der Leyen, President of the Commission, addresses the European Parliament in September in the EU's speech, she told us about the European Health Union. And I think that this pandemic shows clearly that we need to have to act in common. And I will also stress that even to create good and fair economic conditions for the industry, for instance, for the pharma industry, we must work together, because one of the problems that the industry faces is a completely heterogeneity of prices and of procedures between different European countries. Even now, I will never get with the criticism against the European Commission on the vaccination process. I think that we should be optimistic about the vaccination process. It was a very complex process, and it's a victory of the investigation, a victory of the pharma industry, a victory of the citizenship of humanity. But however, we can see how it's difficult to get a common approach between member states, even for the small regulatory questions. Should we, in one European country, they say that the AstraZeneca vaccination cannot be given to people more than 65 years. In the other side of the border, of the so-called border, other member states states that the vaccine cannot be administered to someone with less than 60 years. Well, I think that we have a work to do in creating a more coherent European system on the health sector, and we should work on that. We will begin now.
In fact, COVID-19 pandemic.
Let me say only one thing. I think this is a very good subject to include in the conference on the future of Europe that will start now, and we'll listen all the Europeans and institutions about what we want in the future of Europe. I think that we want more health in the future of Europe.
Yeah, and that's important because, in fact, COVID-19 pandemic exposed supply chain vulnerabilities in the European Union, in the fields of medical device and in the fields of vaccines. How can we reinforce our strategic autonomy in the health sector and contribute to economic recovery and resilience, in your opinion?
I think that we really need to have to invest in reindustrialization of Europe. We cannot imagine, we cannot be naive about our geostrategic position in the world. We must help the industry to have to produce in our territory. We have some good news. For instance, in 2020, the Portuguese health economy sector increased its exportations by 11%. And if you see in the sector in the last 10 years, the increase in exportations from the Portuguese health sector is 150%. It's amazing. So we are almost one point of GDP, 1% of GDP in exportations, and I think that we should organize that work. We must have in our geographic space the supply chains for all essential goods, and I think that we must think not about the short-term policies. Because in short term, we have the temptation of buying what is cheaper, but we must have a medium and large term perspective. And I think that the paper of Professor Oswald clearly says that if we want to have enough resources to get health innovation to all citizens, we need to have a health economic sector which is productive and which creates resources to allow that to do something that like that. And I think that we have also, of course, a problem of safety of our peoples, of European citizens, because in the first weeks of the pandemic, in February and March of 2020, we all feel that we are unsafe because of lack of products that were provided in very complex supply chains and were not available in the European space. But this is the bad news. But we have good news. We have solved that very quickly. So we have installed capacity to do that. We must create the legal, economical framework to allow Europe to reindustrialize.
Well, Portas, how do we solve this problem? $1 million, euros.
$2 billion question. But look, it's easier an European Economics Nobel Prize wrote recently that it is easier to speak about relocation than to do it, because of the specific characteristics of supply chain framework. It is so it is not, it's very demagogical to say we can produce in one single country, in one single facility, 100% of a single vaccine. You need dozens, if not hundreds, of specific elements you have to import, at least from different 20 sources, different sources. So it's very demagogical to say break patents. So if you break patents, how do you incentivize research? And how do you organize a vaccination program? Do you think we would have more vaccines with less patents? It's exactly the opposite. But on the supply chain question, don't forget you have a strongly fragmented supply chain. So you have to, in my opinion, maybe for a country like Portugal, it is relevant to be very focused in some dominions of that supply chain. Not to have the ambition of, because it's theoretically and practically impossible, of fulfilling the supply chain. But we can be competitive if we have adequate public funding and private funding on the pharma sector and a good regulatory environment. We have to improve, namely on the readiness of the response. How many times you need in Portugal or in Europe to license this, and benchmark with our countries. If we want to be competitive, we have to be competitive in this kind of criteria, okay? But maybe in such a fragmented supply chain, we can probably focus ourselves in some moments or fragments of that supply chain. And then you can discuss at a European level what could be a health safety reserve, for instance. You have it in other sides. So the problem was, remember, was not on with vaccines. It was with medical devices or with masks in the beginning of the pandemic. So you produce it in Europe, you export. In Asia, many countries bought in Europe millions and dozens of millions of masks. And from one day to another, we had no reserves, okay? So this can be an useful discussion, but just to fulfill one point on a very critical issue, lessons learned are a very good to do after a crisis. And if we want to face the next global crisis, because this one was not the first one, and it will be not the last. So the question of lessons learned is, are we better prepared to the next one? We don't know if it is a pandemic one, a financial one, or a climate change one, for instance. 2 or 3 details I want to remark. Why compare benchmark when USA financed the pharma research and when Europe did it on COVID? There is a large difference of many months between warp speed, financing, R&D, not just purchasing, financing R&D, and in Europe, we were basically clients. We didn't research massively R&D. That is one benchmark we should do. Why the Americans financed R&D much more than the Europeans. Second, benchmark FDA and European Medicament Agency. Benchmark budget, human resources. Maybe we can criticize a lot of things on America, but the regulatory framework was more, till the moment, more efficient in FDA than in the European agency. We should think why. Do we have enough resources, budget, and technical, yes or no, if we want to face a crisis like that. And finally, the other thing, maybe you were mentioning on the life sciences. Recently, I read a study, very interesting study, on life sciences. It means a big part of the future. First option of an American investor, to invest in America. First option of an European investor, to invest in America. First option of an European investor, when he chooses to invest in Europe, UK. And then France, and then Germany. So, Houston, we have a problem, okay? So, if we think that our best environment to invest is not in the continent, but in the United States, we should think why. It's their fault or our problem? I think it's more our problem.
We have a lot of work to do.
Okay, but at least if we learn lessons, we will be better prepared to the next one.
For sure. And this is the main conclusion on your answers and on Manuel Pizarro as well. So I thank you both for being with us this morning. It was for sure very interesting for all the people that are watching us this morning. Now it's time to discuss access and affordability. And we are pleased to welcome our next keynote speaker. He is Tim Wilsden, Vice President of consulting firm Charles River Associates. Tim, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Pleasure to join with you today.
Start your presentation.
Great. Super. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Apologies. As with every presentation nowadays, I'm doing this by Zoom rather than joining with you in person. But what if we move to the next slide? What I'd like to do over the next 10 to 15 minutes is just give you a bit of an overview of a paper we've written working with FPIA on the root causes of unavailability and delay. And I'll go into what I mean by that in a minute. I suppose what I'd like to take out of this presentation is a couple of key messages, and particularly that there's no simple answer to this. It's a multifactorial problem, and hence we're going to have to work on it together. So don't be surprised when that's my conclusion in 15 minutes time. But let me give you a little bit of background on what we were trying to do. So if we move to the next slide. The analysis of access and delay to innovative medicines is not new. We've been worried about this for a long period of time. There's many papers on this that have been written over the years by the industry, by the European Commission, by academics. I suppose what exacerbated the issue is the success in innovation over the last 5 years. We've had a healthy pipeline of products bringing breakthrough innovations, delivering to patients. And this has led to an increasing focus on why we have different levels of access across European markets. There's common agreement. Everyone agrees that innovation is only valuable if it gets to the patient. So that's not a contentious issue. There's clear data presented by all sides that there's big variation across European Union. And I'll present a little bit about that in a minute. And this has been an issue that the industry has looked at through the WAIT survey for many years. It's clearly set out in the pharma strategy. It's an issue for the European Commission. It's an issue in many member states and Portugal, as with many other countries. So what FPIA asked CRA to support is to look at the evidence. Let's go back. Let's not necessarily produce lots of new evidence, although we did, working with IQVIA, run some more data analysis, but really let's look at what we've got and look at where we agree and look at where maybe we need some more evidence. So that was the objective of the exercise. If we move to the next slide, one of the things I think is useful is for us to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. When we talk about availability and delay, terminology that's used in lots of different ways, what we're talking about is the length of time from the product getting through regulatory approval through to a national reimbursement decision. Now, clearly, access to patients depends on diffusion and the whole process of utilization in the healthcare system. That's another issue. We didn't deal with that in this paper. We focused on the length of time from the regulatory process through to the national reimbursement process. But within that, there are a number of interesting data points, and the X's in this picture. So this is the time at which manufacturers submit to the pricing and reimbursement authorities. That's a length of time within this delay. There's the HTA process, and then there's the final pricing and reimbursement negotiation. So what we found useful in doing this analysis is to look at the length of time, look at the proportion of products which are available in different member states, but also try to look within that at the different time segments. So I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about that as we go through. So if we move to what did we find? Well, I suppose it's useful to set out the evidence on availability, just so everyone recognizes the extent of the problem. There is a wide variation in the time to availability. I think people will know these numbers, but the sevenfold difference in the length of time. So 120 days in Germany, over 800 days in Poland. If you look at the proportion of products that are available across the European member states, I've added the UK in here as well, a big variation from the CE markets on the right-hand side, where a very low proportion of products that are recently gotten through regulatory approval are available, to the richer countries on the left-hand side with a high number, but still variation as we move from north to south in Europe. Have we seen some improvement? Well, yes, we have. Oncology medicines have seen some higher levels of availability, shorter delays as we look at the different data over time. But orphan medicines, very considerable variation across markets and very long delays. So we're not actually seeing an improvement in this as we compare survey over survey in different years. And in some ways, the variation across countries is just the top level of the problem. When you look within countries, you've also got vast differences. So an example we use is Estonia, the fastest product, 21 days, the longest product, 1,400 days. So huge variation within countries, within regions of a country. So it's clearly a complicated, long-standing problem, and this was before COVID, and we're all anticipating, as I think your previous session was on, is some of the issues that are going to follow when we finally get through this pandemic. So the big issues on availability and access, which everyone agrees we need to think how to address. So if we turn to the next slide, what we've started to do is to say, well, what causes this? And if you think about the literature, there's a big debate with many people saying, well, it's because of the industry, it's because of strategic decisions, it's about the launch sequence that the industry uses to launch in some markets before others. So it's about commercial decision making. If you look at other papers, it says, well, it's really about the pricing and reimbursement rules, the transparency directive, about the requirements countries have before it gets through HTA. So it's about the rules and the regulation. I suppose the high level summary of our paper is, well, it's both. We have a set of rules and regulations and different market practices, and that leads to different commercial decisions. It leads to decisions to launch in different markets, given the commercial consequences of those decisions. So it's an interconnected problem between the rules affecting the environment and the decisions that leads to in terms of commercial players and the healthcare systems. Also, these problems are interrelated. So it's difficult to say it's answer 6 rather than answer 3. These are interrelated causal factors. So we see them as a package. But what we've had a go at doing is saying, well, how many do we find? We find there's 10 root causes. I'm sure we can argue whether it's 9 or 11. And these fall into 5 categories. So there's time to the market authorization process. I'll describe why that's interesting in a second. There's the pricing and reimbursement process, and that breaks down into 2 issues. The initiation of that, and there is a length of time before it's initiated, and the length of time of the process itself. Within the pricing and reimbursement process, it's useful to pull out the value assessment process because that has some clear differences across markets, and it has some very interesting characteristics as you start to think about the choices that are made both by companies and by countries. You then have health system readiness. Even when you have availability, we see we don't necessarily have access, so we need to think about that. And then, although we've focused on the national decision making, it's impossible when we think about some countries not to ignore that that's only the national decision and then used as a regional approval process. So I think we've highlighted that this is a continuum by including that as number 10. So I won't go through every one of these, but I'll just pull out some highlights in the following slides. So if you move to the next slide. Something that I spend my time working in life sciences and pharmaceutical policy. And I must admit, coming back to the regulatory process and the length, that I was surprised by how Europe is lagging behind the US. When I looked at this about 15 years ago for the European Commission, I think there was a big argument that there was convergence going on here. I think what we found is actually there's quite a big difference. It depends on the therapeutic area, but between the US is approving products, getting through regulatory approval quicker than Europe. This has been picked up by multiple academic studies. The recent OECD analysis on cancer also found exactly the same findings. So there are early access mechanisms that allow access to products before regulatory approval, but they're only available in some markets. Everyone always talks about the ATU. We don't focus on the many other countries other than France that don't have an early access mechanism. So we think if you're going to start talking about availability, you should be starting with the regulatory process. It was great in the pharmaceutical strategy. They set out the aspiration for Europe to be on par with other areas. If we move to the next slide. In terms of the initiation, a lot is talked about in terms of the initiation of the pricing and reimbursement process. And clearly there are some countries where you get immediate launch. Germany, we spend a lot of time thinking about that, but there's many other countries where there's a delay between the regulatory approval and the start of the pricing and reimbursement process. And we've tried to illustrate that on the right-hand side. Why do you have that? Well, there are a number of different reasons. One, and this is now very well documented, is external reference pricing is leading to commercial decision-making and affecting the attractiveness to launch in some markets versus others. There is a resource-intensive process, both for the countries, but also the companies. And when you think about small companies launching in Europe, it's just not possible to launch in 27 member states at one time. So we need to take that into account. And there are rules and regulations. In some countries, it's not the company that initiates the process, it's clinicians. In other countries, there's requirements on the number of other countries that is already gone through a process. So it's a mixture of commercial decision-making and rules and regulation. If we move to the next slide. If we assume the process has started, many countries now, obviously, including Portugal, have an HTA process where we're thinking about different types of evidence. And when you start to compare, and this is data from the time to patient access study that was conducted, if you start to compare the data that different countries use, there are different evidence requirements. If you think particularly about surrogate endpoints, you have a big variability when you look from one market, Sweden, which largely accepts these, to other markets, which often find this as a problematic set of evidence. And this leads to stop clocks. It leads to requests for additional data. That inevitably leads to delay. So I think we can't ignore the different evidence requirements that we have across countries. If we move to the next slide. We also have the issue of price and the alignment of price with value. We have different countries taking different decisions on the value of products. We also have very big differences in the income of different markets across Europe. And we're trying to align price to the value that country puts on the products, taking into account their ability to pay. It's inevitable that will lead to differences of opinion, will lead to a slowdown in the negotiation. And what we have with things like external reference pricing is a barrier to aligning price to value. So it shouldn't be unexpected that we see a discussion around price and whether the price reflects value as being a part of this process and causing one of the reasons for delay. What we need to have is mechanisms that allow price to be assigned to value. The literature says, well, managed entry agreements, innovative contracting is a way of doing this. If you look at the maps on the right-hand side, sorry, they're a bit small, you find their use is not even across Europe. And that, where we're seeing some of the problems with access, we've got the lowest use of managed entry agreements. And again, that's a correlation suggesting this is one of the causal factors that prevents price being aligned to value. If we move to slide 12, as an economist, and this is very much an economic, I suppose, assessment of why we see differences in access and availability, where we've got very different levels of income, we would expect countries to take different decisions about their priorities in terms of healthcare, as you would with anything. So it's not a surprise we see differences in choices across different countries. An interesting analysis I haven't got time to talk about today is countries choosing to have competing products or choosing to have one product. And I think that's a very interesting choice different countries are choosing to make, which affects availability. Another example of this is diagnostics. Some countries have the diagnostic infrastructure to use personalized medicines. In other countries, you can't identify the patients. Therefore, we wouldn't expect to see the same level of availability across countries. So it is important to think about the health system infrastructure, think about how we're going to invest in that in the future. But that clearly affects the level of availability and delays that we see in the market today. Just a couple more slides. If we move to, yes, please. If we move away from availability just for a second, but I think it's worth just having this point, is even where we do see countries that have got a product on the national reimbursement list, what's interesting, and this obviously we've used the IQVIA data to support this, is look at whether we actually have access. Are we seeing utilization of these products? And again, something that I think many people knew, but I suppose was new to me, about 20% of products we have availability, we don't have access. So just getting products to be through the national reimbursement list does not mean they're accessible to patients. That also probably explains why in some markets we've got companies being reluctant to necessarily apply for reimbursement if they may get on the reimbursement list, but they wouldn't actually see access. So this is a hidden issue, but important when we start to think about solutions. So if we turn to the conclusions, and I suppose where do we go from here? This is a paper that's on the FPO website. We've talked about this with quite a lot of stakeholders now, but I suppose the interesting question is, well, what do we do about it? And the paper hints about some of these, but doesn't go into a lot of detail. Maybe that's something for discussion. So we come up with 5 areas that map really to our 5 root causes. So the regulatory process, making sure that's as fast as possible, taking into account safety and quality. And really, as we're thinking about personalized medicine, thinking about the interaction between diagnostics and medicines and vaccines, of course, given the context today. Number 2, it's really important for us to understand these delays. And it's shocking how little data we have. The weight data is amazing, but that only picks up the endpoints. We need data that explains where we've got filing going on in different markets to understand what's really going on. So some transparency in this area would be really, really helpful. We need to align prices with ability to pay and value. Innovative contracting is one way of doing that. And we still need to improve the use of different types of innovative contracting across Europe. Used very well in some markets, and used less well in others. It's a big area where the industry and the payer can align, and it helps with the evidence issue, and it helps with aligning prices to value. A value assessment is a problem. We've got these different views of evidence across European markets. We need to think how to improve efficiency and the quality of the value assessment process. Clearly, that's something that can be done at the member state level as well as at the European level. And then we need to think about these proposals that would improve equity of access and solidarity. And I suppose the ongoing discussion of how we can get differential pricing or tiered pricing to work in practice, how we mitigate, not necessarily preventing the use of, but how we mitigate the negative consequences of things like external reference pricing need to be further discussed. So I've used up my time. I'll stop here and look forward to the discussion.
discussion that we'll have now in the next minutes. This session will be commented by Alexandre Lourenço, President of the Board of the Portuguese Association of Hospital Managers, by Natalie Moll, Director General of European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, by Antonella Cardone, Director of the European Cancer Patient Coalition and member of the EU Health Coalition, and also by my side by Claudia Furtado, Head of Health Technology Assessment, Pricing and Reimbursement Division at Infarmed, as you know, the Portuguese National Authority of Medicines and Health Products. Welcome, everyone. Claudia, I will start with you. You're here by my side. Your comments on this presentation we've just seen.
Okay, thank you. I will make my comments on two main aspects. One of on issues that team presented on the root causes of unavailability. We recognize the issues raised by theme, and we see that there are differences in the approaches by member states on the process to promote access, and also in the HTA evaluation itself. We recognize this difference. We had a project that was a NETA project, the network of HTA's agencies, that intended to decrease these differences by making joint clinical assessments and also by providing methodological guidelines that will make these assessments more harmonized between European countries. It was not enough. It was a project and it still is going on, but it was not enough to decrease these differences. So we have to admit that different evaluations in member states can reflect in future different access between European citizens to the same medicine. But I would like to add two additional root causes to the ones mentioned by theme, and I think that are some of the causes that delay our process, at least in Portugal. The first one is as an HTA agency, we identify differences between the quality of evidence presented by the different companies. I know it's technical, but it's an issue that
it's important for the subject.
It's important for the evaluation because Tim mentioned that it can cause clock stops because we have to make additional requests. We have dossiers that are evaluated in 2 months, others that take more or less 1 year to evaluate because the evidence submitted by the company is not enough to make an HTA evaluation. And that is a point that could be solved together, agencies and companies. We can work on that to decrease this difference between the quality of evidence presented. And there are some projects that called early dialogues and scientific advice that can be requested by the companies so that they can develop their clinical trials and clinical studies that are with evidence that is going to be more aligned to the needs that the HTA and the EMA will need on their evaluation process. That is one main problem for us.
Is it easy, that cooperation?
It's voluntary, so sometimes it depends on the willingness of the company to be included in this scientific advice or early dialogues with EMA and UNETA. But I think the process gains efficiency if they are they see the benefits of these early.
So it's a note for the industry to.
Yes, and I think and that one point that I think we can mention later is the HTA regulation that will improve. That is a dossier that will promote this joint clinical assessment and joint scientific consultations, and that will promote these early dialogues. Another root cause that I think it was mentioned, but not in the way that we would like to see it, is the pricing conditions presented by the companies. That is one other main aspect that delays the access, because we all recognize that the innovation has to be rewarded. And it was presented in previous panel that we must invest in innovation and we must reward it because it is important to have new medicines that increase the outcomes in health outcomes. But that innovation has a price, but the price has to be fair. And that is a problem that we still facing. And we nowadays in our evaluation process and pricing and reimbursement, probably the more difficult part is the negotiation process. And that is because we start with conditions that are not reasonable or adequate to our context, not only Portugal, because other European countries face the same problems.
The same problem.
Yes, so I think we could benefit from at the beginning of the process, negotiation process, both parts, payers and companies, start with more reasonable approaches to financing. That is my comment. That are my comments on the root causes.
Okay.
We can
Later
on.
we'll
Yes.
have not so much time as we wanted, but a few minutes for your final thoughts. Now we introduce Alexandre Lourenço in this conversation. Good morning, Alexandre. What do you think will be key to enable a comprehensive discussion of the root causes of unequal patient access, including healthcare investment and organization? We are not listening. I think your micro is not on your device. Is it possible? No, we have problems with your sound.
I believe that we can't.
Oh, no.
Is it better now?
Okay, now we can hear you.
No, we can't have this kind of remote conferences without someone with the mic muted. So thank you so much for being with and for inviting me to be with you today. Actually, the topic of our panel is access and affordability. And I believe we are at a good position with this still crisis mode to discuss this topic that actually it is also applied for even to the COVID-19 pandemic. And this our panel, this access and affordability, the component of affordability, I will mostly focus on it. Because affordable, or something that is affordable, means that its price is low enough that you or most of the people have money to buy it. And if you can afford something, you have enough money to pay for it. So we must assume that we have mainly two guiding vectors, the income and also the price of the good. And we must recognize is that a country like Portugal, when we are buying medicines, actually we are mostly our overall expenditure in pharmaceutical are an importation to the country. So mostly we are creating jobs in other countries and high valuable jobs in other countries and not actually in our country. So this creates a situation where actually we are not contributing also for our income. And the other issue is the pricing. And the pricing, and as Claudia was mentioning, should be adjusted to the value created. And of course, even taking into consideration the fact that most of our pharmaceutical expenditure is an import, we should also recognize that even at the European level, we should have mechanisms that recognize the need for solidarity, fairness, and pricing. So what we call some sort of tier pricing strategies. Because it's not clearly, and it's not fair for a country like Portugal with our GDP per capita, even with our public that the prices are, even for other European produced goods, the prices are the same that in other countries. Because actually, for us, it's not affordable, and it actually is not contributing for our income. And in this sense, of course, this is not only an issue that we solve at the European level or at multilateral level, but it's an issue that should be also recognized by the country and also addressing the root causes of why we are not having or developing an industrial strategy on healthcare. And that probably is some homework that we need to do, is that actually we need to develop a very relevant and effective strategy to create value and wealth from health sciences. And I totally believe that it's possible to do this regarding precision medicine, regarding big data, artificial intelligence, and even genomics, but also and mostly in strategies from R&D and innovation, where as a country we can have easy access to clinical trials, we can really develop partnerships with the industry, value partnerships, and we need to have this kind of a growth plan for life sciences, where the investment in biotech is crucial for the country to actually be able to increase accessibility to medicines and to be a country where innovation is affordable.
We now go to talk with Antonella Cardon. Antonella, good morning. Welcome to our discussion. Access to medical innovation and treatments varies in the European Union from 120 days to over 800 days. Do these differing evaluation criteria and access timelines across member states generate savings or rather undermine value creation for economies, health systems, and mainly for patients, in your opinion? I don't know if Antonella is listening us.
Good morning, everyone.
Oh, okay. Good morning.
Good morning. So thank you, Tim, for opening up this session and setting the scene so clearly on the challenges in the system that cause, in the end, delays in accessing innovative treatments and exacerbate inequalities across Europe. So here I'm representing the voice of the patients, as the ECPC, the European Cancer Patient Coalition, is the largest cancer patient umbrella organization in Europe, with over 450 members from 48 countries, and which is also one of the over 40 members of the EU Health Coalition. And the EU Health Coalition is the multi-stakeholder initiative addressing how in Europe we can foster innovation, converging different sectors to deliver the best outcomes for patients. So it is my pleasure to take part in this event, as I believe that it is a great opportunity to exchange views on a topic which deserves the highest priority in Europe. And I would like to start reminding that the right to health is a human right recognized in the international human rights treaties and ratified by the member states. For this right to be guaranteed, prevention, access to medicines, treatment, and high-quality care must be ensured equally to all patients in the EU. On the contrary, there are huge disparities across Europe in terms of accessibility to treatments. Patients in Northern and Western Europe access new products on average 100 to 200 days after market authorization, as mentioned before. And patients in Southern and Eastern Europe access new products only 600 to 1,000 days after market authorization. And even within countries, there can be significant differences in time to access. So what delays in access mean for patients? So too often, a delay means the chance to live or die. And just to mention an example, the 5-year survival rates for colon cancer range from 70% in Iceland to 50% in Croatia. And we believe that one of the main challenges is due to the current HTA process. So the HTA process is currently performed by about 50 HTA agencies across Europe. And it is fundamental to reduce differences between the national HTA approaches with regards to the procedures and methodologies, and make it easier for national HTA bodies to share results. I totally understand that a full HTA harmonization may be difficult, because of the non-clinical domains of the HTA core model are context specific. However, it is the most ideal case scenario. Today, which is not a normal time, the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted our lives, and the new situation challenged the capacity of European health systems and the lack of tools and resources. We have seen a severe disruption of care, shortages, inadequacy of resources and health system organization, insufficient and unequal access to prevention, treatment, and healthcare services. What is more, in the coming years, we will see pivotal changes to healthcare, as it has become and will become increasingly important to invest in an efficient way and make a better use of the resources we have. We have learned a series of lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic, and therefore I would like to draw your attention now and share with you some recommendations related to the access to healthcare. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us the importance of cooperation. We already heard about the relevance of cooperation between sectors and actors in ensuring our healthcare systems work to their optimum ability in preventing premature death. The EU needs to play a greater role in addressing healthcare challenges, and coordination and collaboration among member states is crucial. At the EU Health Coalition, we all together truly believe that the time for action is now, and for that reason we have called on the European Commission to facilitate a permanent multi-stakeholder forum for better access to health innovation. This would be a space in which stakeholders come together and discuss what exactly are the drivers, but also the barriers to access health innovation, therapies, improvement of outcomes. So here, member states, national authorities, patients, professionals in the field and industry will provide insights. I think that the EU has the capacity to be a hub for both research and innovation in the field of health and healthcare. This shared vision of health in Europe should foresee the support of the measurement and collection of health data that should be standardized across European health systems, and this, of course, includes outcomes relevant for people and patients. Besides this multi-stakeholder forum for better access to health innovation would serve as a tool to cover all aspects in the care pathways and healthcare services in order to improve and enhance progress, as we strongly believe that all EU citizens should have access to health innovation, no matter where they were born or live in Europe. This leads me to the next point, and that is fostering a cooperation environment with local and regional stakeholders, as they are especially the ones close to the citizens and the ones that understand their specific needs. On the other side, the Commission should set the right mechanisms to assure that actions are also coordinated at European level, and in this way, policies will be more efficient and provide better outcomes. European cooperation in health research boosts European leadership in the medical and health space, and not only that, but also EU health research contributes directly to both economic recoveries, as it will optimize the resources spent, and the health and well-being of European citizens, as more people will benefit from it. So having said that, putting in place European coordinated health research initiative is crucial, not only to fulfill policy objectives, but more importantly, to protect the lives of patients and the European population more broadly. I need to make a relevant point here. And this is one of the most important lessons that we have learned from COVID-19. We need to take decisions fast and adapt to the challenges as they come. This need to be speeded up to offer the right solutions to the patients. So we need both flexibility of financial mechanisms and the regulatory frameworks. Building on the need to act fast, the Commission should build a framework for a European health data space as our digital future. Europe's digital future is key in the transformation of health and social care, as well as in research and innovation, as they will benefit from this space in order to access data and develop new technologies. Coming to the end of my comments, I would like to state that digital health services will play a critical role in the delivery of integrated care. All actors together, policymakers, ministries of health, regional authorities, they all need to develop and also implement health strategies, guidelines, action plans, and provide guidance on interoperability. Lastly, artificial intelligence is already here. It is not the future, it is the present, and it can bring enormous benefits to increase health outcomes and efficiency. So the healthcare of tomorrow needs to take this perspective into consideration and act upon them to ensure that no one is left behind when building a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable health system.
A lot of proposals from Antonella Cardone in this intervention. Thank you so much for your participation. And we can see some of these words of Antonella and pass to our last guest of this discussion, Natalie Moll. Good morning. We see several countries, as Antonella was saying, and different entities working on different policy solutions to balance access and affordability. Could a multi-stakeholder forum be effective to discuss concrete proposals?
Yes, good morning, and thank you for the invitation. I think this is a really important conversation that we're having. For us as an industry, our products, the innovation that we're bringing now is so new, is so different, that we really need to have that conversation together. We need to have that conversation with member states. We need to have all the stakeholders present. We also need to have the Commission present, who's working on proposals that are incredibly important, like the HTA regulation that was mentioned many times. We need to sit together and say, post-COVID-19, by the way, so after all that countries have suffered, that healthcare systems have suffered, we still want to and need to introduce new medical innovation, what's coming, the cures and the other therapies, the combined therapies, the advanced therapies. How do we do that in a sustainable way and in a fair and equitable way for all European countries? And that is not a conversation that we are succeeding to do in country by country. You've seen it. You've seen the data from Tim. You've heard the experience of patients as well. So you can see that the way we've been doing it so far is not working because the technology, the therapies are so new. We are coming with a completely different paradigm. We're creating a sort of Mexican wave of impact throughout the healthcare systems that needs to be absorbed, but also needs to be planned and also needs to be sustainable and needs to be financed. And this is something that if we continue to discuss it as individual parts of the healthcare system, we will not succeed, because today the healthcare systems are set up to deal with chronic diseases and the treatments for chronic diseases. And now we have a technology that is completely revolutionizing it. So we have a great opportunity of the technology, if you like, and it's not only in pharmaceuticals, also in other parts of healthcare. And we have if you like, the opportunity in a way of what has happened to our healthcare systems because of COVID-19. So, the reduced budgets and the impacts it had, but also the learnings we've had. We've worked together in an incredible way over these last 12 months. Everybody recognizes the collaboration, the cooperation. It was said this morning earlier, what we have today, the vaccines that we have today, the rollouts that we have today could never have been possible without the collaboration that we've had on a constant basis between all actors. So we know we can do it. We know that when we have a huge problem, we can pull together and we can find very concrete solutions, because you asked me about being concrete. Tim presented the concrete problems as we've seen it. We will come forward as an industry with even more visibility. One of the 5 solutions that Tim was presenting was around how can we have more transparency regarding European access hurdles, and we will continue to work on that and as an industry to offer that. But on the other side, we need to be able to have a conversation on solutions. Having facts is great. We need to agree on which facts we all believe are hurdles, and then we really need to come with concrete solutions. And the last thing I'm going to say is, you saw the managed entry agreements. There are many that exist for many different diseases in different countries, but they're not being taken up as much as you would imagine. So is it a lack of knowledge? Is it the wrong adaptation? We don't know. We published now last summer the market entry agreements and proposals that are existing, that are in place to increase the visibility and the knowledge about it. But that's not enough. Until we sit down and have a conversation as healthcare system actors on how do we make the most of this innovation, how do we introduce it today, but also for the patients of tomorrow, we're missing an opportunity, but we're also, as Antonella said, making patients wait, and that is not acceptable.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Our time is ending anyway. I would like to ask Alexandre and also Claudia here by my side, your final thoughts on what you've been listening in the last minutes. Alexandre, we can start with you.
Thank you. I believe that the mic is open now, so I will start and be brief. No, mostly I believe that we agree on something, and following the previous presentation is that actually we need to work together, and I totally believe that the industry and governments need to work together in increasing the accessibility and affordability of medicines, specifically, mainly in the context that the older system is in total transformation. We believe that all the issues regarding with the digital transformation will redesign the way that we provide care. And I totally believe that only with this full cooperation between industry, governments and providers, it will be possible to deliver better access to care. And actually, just remembering the World Health Day is that we really need to create fairer societies and mostly healthy societies. And I totally believe that everyone on the sector, on the industry, is committed to have a healthier population across the world, and specifically in this case, in this context, across Europe.
Claudia, do you believe in a fair access and affordability in the future?
Yes, I believe. Otherwise, we won't be here, and this discussion really reflects the importance of this fair access. And taking on the words from Natalie, I think that it's time that we all sit together to talk about the solutions, and it will be at European level, without any doubt. And I think that there are already some issues that we can work on, like the horizon scanning initiatives that will allow us to identify in an early phase the new medicines that will cause challenges to the health systems, not only financing, but on the way we deliver healthcare. And we should work on that, on the HTA regulation that will make a more harmonized joint clinical assessments and an early access to medicines. And also one point that Antonella also mentioned, that is the use of evidence data, real-world data, and take the opportunity of the European digital transition to obtain data that we can transform into knowledge that will support our HTA and pricing decisions. That will be the future.
Why so difficult, the dialogue between all these stakeholders?
We have maybe we have different interests because we want, but we have a common goal. So I think we can reach this dialogue because our common goal is to promote access without any doubt. But we have different constraints, I think.
That's a problem. Thank you so much, Claudia. Thank you to all the other guests we had in the last minutes, Antonella, Natalie, and Alexandre. Thank you so much for your participation. Our next keynote speaker is Richard Barker, founder and president of Med Advice and Life Science and Healthcare Leader, that will present us his perspective about enabling science full impact on patients' needs and outcomes. Richard Barker, good morning. Welcome to this discussion.
Good morning. Can you hear me clearly?
Perfectly.
Perfectly good. So before we start, I need to show you my passport.
I cannot read from here everything.
It says I remain
okay.
European.
Okay, great. I think all of we here as well.
It's a great pleasure to address this conference at what I think is an existential moment for the EU in healthcare. I think this is a pivotal moment in time. And I'm going to explain why I think it's a pivotal moment in time. Certainly, it is no longer necessary to make the case that life sciences is an important part of the European economy. That is very, very clear from COVID. But it is also very clear from the discussions we have had that there remain huge obstacles to working together across Europe. In a way, you have just lost one obstacle, because it is always going to be difficult to bring the UK along with European solidarity. So I much regret that the UK left the EU, but we may have made it easier for you to move forward. Yes, let us have our first slide. I'm going to touch on the lessons from COVID for the acceleration of innovation, talk about the new era of precision medicine and its implications, as I have been asked to talk about the enabling conditions for the innovation ecosystem of the future, and what does that mean for Europe's opportunity in the new global order. I will go very quickly through the slides because I am keen to get to the discussion. Next slide. So COVID experience comes at a pivotal time for the EU. The background is one where R&D productivity globally has been dropping. As we have heard, slow processes of regulation and reimbursement, and that the European investment environment is seen as much less attractive than the US. This goes, by the way, for UK as well. But we have seen some progress. We have seen experiments with adaptive development and conditional approval. We have seen some progress, we have just heard about it, on convergence of European HTA. We see some new but rather expensive personalized therapies, some experience with managed access agreements, but very importantly, we have seen the emergence of China on the global market with its very different dynamics. And we will talk in a moment about the positives from COVID. Next slide. So we all know that this is Eroom's law. R&D productivity has declined over time. Next slide. But we have seen that we can move from the current pathway of one-time yes-no regulation to, next slide. Next slide. Yes, sorry, let's move on. Yes, to applying adaptive thinking so that we can have a smaller number of selective patients using a therapy. Then you get, next slide, the approval, and then you can use real-world evidence to study those patients after that approval has been given. Next slide. So people have talked about this. The time from identification of the agent to the emergence of the vaccine. And coronavirus has been an enormous achievement in comparison with any other disease you mentioned. Next slide. So what has been happening? Firstly, there's been universal recognition of an unmet need. There's been the willingness to advance purchase and subsidize development. We have heard about the different stances of European governments and the US, but there have been grants for manufacturing facilities, the rapid setup of comparative therapy trials, and the rapid setup of vaccine trials in high prevalence settings. There's clearly been fast-track regulatory review and emergency use approvals. There's been the suspension of normal cost-effectiveness analysis because of the urgency. There's been overpurchase against need. Certainly that has been true, as people have seen in the UK. There have been some mixed success in international collaborative purchase agreements. And there have been dedicated product distribution and administration systems, although there has also been the experience that you cannot ask politicians to implement things and get straightforward, streamlined results. Next slide. At the same time, we are entering this new era of precision medicine, targeting technologies, personalized treatments, molecular redefinition of disease, cell and gene therapies, but they represent issues. So we need more and different clinical education. We need business models that incorporate biomarkers. We have affordability questions around very rare and very expensive therapies. And there's continuing reluctance in some pharmaceutical companies to use precision medicine if it will narrow their product markets. But we have seen also useful developments, partnerships between pharmaceutical companies and diagnostics companies, the emergence of clinical decision support systems to help doctors target medicine, and some level of pricing creativity. Next slide. So I wrote a book about precision medicine, which I believe is important in tackling this innovation gap between the science and the implementation. Next slide. And these are some of the areas I've talked about. I don't have time to go into them, but their common theme is the use of precision medicine to streamline the process of innovation. Next slide. So precision medicines are coming forward now through the pipeline in very much larger numbers. This is the gene therapy pipeline volume, the number of agents included somewhere in clinical development, all the way from preclinical to pre-registration. Next slide. And they have very large markets. I'm sorry, probably you cannot read this, but some of the markets that have been laid out here by a recent study shows that in principle, these could represent a very large part of the pharmaceutical market if they are all approved. Next slide. So could we carry some of the COVID lessons that I listed earlier forward into the future? Firstly, is there universal recognition of unmet need? We have to remember that cardiovascular disease and cancer are still, even now, killing more people than COVID. Those are urgent, but not urgent in the same way as a pandemic. Can we use advanced purchasing more aggressively, for example, in antimicrobial resistance? Can we provide grants for manufacturing facilities? Well, certainly viral manufacturing has been important in the pandemic, but it is also important in gene therapy. Can we set up European comparative trials, for example, for drug repurposing? Can we rapidly set up trials in high prevalence settings through European disease registries? Can we fast track regulatory review? Can we waive normal cost effectiveness analysis? Well, that's probably not realistic, but I think we have tools available now. We have the ability to be able to make common HTA analysis. And if that is coupled with pricing that is linked to GDP per capita, we could perhaps have European HTA faster than we have been seeing it. Again, we could overpurchase against need, like in antimicrobial resistance, and we can strike collaborative purchase agreements. I think pharmaceutical industry is afraid of European purchasing, but I think it could be the pharma future if some of the other pieces were in place. And we will need dedicated product distribution and administration systems that are more efficient than the ones we have seen so far. Next slide. So what does the European ecosystem of the future look like? A clinical trial system and support that makes greater use to a greater level of European trials, adaptive development tools and regulatory streamlining. We've talked extensively about greater HTA coherence and novel pricing and reimbursement models that enable us to have faster uptake of these precision medicines that I have talked about. Next slide. Let's skip that one. Next slide. And next slide. So I think with some of these tools, we could get dramatic increases in productivity. Next slide. So I'm coming to the end of my remarks, but I think central to this discussion is what is Europe's role in global life sciences? Here we have some of the strengths and opportunities from the USA, from Europe, and from China, but some of the weaknesses and threats. And Europe, in a sense, can be the worst of both worlds because it can have slow reimbursement cycles, slow uptake of innovative products once approved. We have heard about that, and obviously has significant price controls. It may be a more attractive market at the moment than China. It is clearly a much less attractive market than the US. Next slide. So what would be enabling conditions for an effective ecosystem? Well, I think we need a new narrative about life sciences based on the positive experience in COVID, public-private partnership that people have been talking about. We already have a strong investment in science in Europe, but it can be strengthened. We need more innovative regulatory and reimbursement systems. People have mentioned data and artificial intelligence, but there is a European opportunity to capture and provide access to a wider range of integrated health system data to help both in the development of new medicines and their deployment. Ultimately, we need better alignment of goals and incentives. I think one of the big missing links in European policy is between the incentives that the health systems have and the incentives that the life science industry has. There's scope to bring those much more closely together. The recognition of the power of public-private partnership, full engagement of patients in every stage of the development system, and dialogue like this one, open dialogue. And I think the final slide. Next slide. So here are some questions that we could choose to discuss. What are the most important lessons from COVID? Have I mentioned them, or are there others? Have I missed enabling conditions? What are the priorities for political action during the Portuguese presidency? Can we harness EU research programs more aggressively, more effectively? Can we have stronger focus on next generation therapies where Europe could regain some of its lead? And what about European health data and AI initiatives? But I guess the final question for me is what will now happen? Will the EU begin to build a European health economy, step by painful step, or will it retreat into health nationalism? And I think that's really the most fundamental question that we all face. Thank you very much.
Sir, thank you so much for your presentation. And now, in the next minutes, we'll have the company of Ian Lecam, Chief Executive Officer of Eurordis, Rare Disease Europe, Maria de Graça Carvalho, member of European Parliament and member of Committee of Industry, Research and Energy, and also Maria do Carmo Fonseca, President of the Board of Institute of Molecular Medicine, João Lobo Antunes, and President of the RNA Society. Welcome to all of you. Ian, I will start with you. What's your comments on what we have been listening in the last minutes?
Thank you. In fact, for sure, unmet needs, maybe to start with the challenges, right, is that the fact is that only 5% of the 6,000 rare diseases have a product approved to treat that disease today in Europe. And only part of them will be curative or stabilizing the disease. The vast majority of them are only to treat one symptoms. So that means that 95% of rare disease have no treatment. Every year, there is about 20 medicinal products approved as an orphan drugs in Europe, which is already fantastic and represents about 30%, 40% of all new medicines in Europe. But that's only 20. And we need 5 times that to have a chance to address the health challenges that we know. But also the patient perception is that in our survey across Europe to 15,000 patients, the reply we get are that 30% never experience any treatment. And among the 70 who have some experience of treatment, 3% have a preventive treatment, which avoid the development of the disease. 5% have a potentially curative treatment. So that means that still the one who have experienced a treatment, 90% of them have an unmet medical need. This is what unmet medical needs is for rare diseases. So we should not be too dramatic and too precise to define what an unmet medical needs, because it's wide and huge for these patients. And on the top of it, the access issues, which were presented previously by previous speakers, we have about 19% today of patients who are unable to access to approved medicines. And that's 3 times the average of the population for their treatments in general. And in addition of that, 12% cannot have access because they cannot afford, because they cannot pay for it, which is twice the average in the population. So for us, that's are kind of the challenges to address. So really the strategy for us is 4 points, is that to leave no one behind. Every life matters, including the life of people with rare diseases, because guess what? When we have a curative treatment, they can have a normal life and then contribute to society and have a full inclusion in terms of development and social inclusion. We need EU to be a world leader, to be confident in itself, to have the political will to be a world leader on health industries. So not only medicines, but also all the technologies in health and healthcare services. And to be driven by patient needs. So an innovation led by patient needs, not only by science or by finance, but by obviously driven by market at the end, but by patient needs. And also to have measurable patient health outcomes. That's the big change compared to the last 20 years. We can now drive our healthcare system, but also the innovation in medicines by really aiming to what is meaningful for the patients, particularly patients-relevant outcomes. And the 4th angle is to reduce inequalities across Europe, because we have the possibility to reduce these inequalities. And in fact, our own surveys indicate that the situation, contrary to what we hear, is improving significantly already in the last years, but with growing divergences for the most curative treatments. Now, we'll be happy to say what's the way forward to address the challenges, and following on the presentation of Mr. Barker, is that to address really the challenges of availability, we need a seamless regulatory HTA pricing reimbursement process. We need to address the fragmentation of the market, which is total nonsense for rare diseases, because it is so small population, particularly for the smallest countries, but even for Germany and France. And to reduce the inequalities of access. So to have some sense of solidarity across Europe, and to be true about what we say to European citizens on that. And we need for that a comprehensive approach, which leverage the assets of Europe, because we do have assets, while addressing our weaknesses. First, we need EMA to go faster and to have an earlier dialogue, much earlier than today with the scientific advice. We need to discuss the unmet needs upfront. We need to bring HTA payers in these early discussions together with patients and doctors. And we need to go faster and to be more supportive on the rolling on advice by the EMA. For HTA, we need the same early dialogue together with EMA, as I just said, but also we need a scientific dialogue on behalf of the network of all agencies, as Antonella was saying a moment ago, not fragmented few agencies collaborating at European level. We need the network itself to provide the advice. And we definitely need this European regulation on HTA toward joint clinical assessment reports. And here, I'd like to make a plea, particularly to the Portuguese authority holding the presidency, that it is total nonsense to limit ourselves to 10 reports per year for the next 3 years. That's what we do today already with the joint action. So why to have a regulation, European regulation, if it's not to do better than what we've been doing in the last years, really? And also not to limit it to cancer. It should be cancer and rare diseases, not because Antonella and myself were here, but simply because it makes sense. The rarity, the limited knowledge, the uncertainties call for collaboration at European level. And this is manageable. It is manageable because there is about 20 products, as I said, per year. Some of them are rare cancers. So we're talking about 20 reports per year. We're not talking about 50 reports. So really, we should do it immediately. And we need to gain experience by doing more reports together, more joint assessment. And the most important point probably across all of that is to have a product life cycle approach and to look at the continuum of evidence generation up to marketing authorization, but also after marketing authorization. And that's why we need that alignment between the regulatory and HTA process and with the pricing and reimbursement authorities. Now, my last point is that for the innovation, I'd like to take you to the edge, really, to the edge of the rarest diseases, like the less in 1 in 100,000 or less than 1 in a million, and also the edge of innovation, the gene therapy and the cell therapies. Think for a moment, does that make sense to ask companies to go to every country for a dossier when in fact there will not even be a treatment center for that technology for the patients in that country? It doesn't make sense. We definitely need to do it at the European level. And that's why we're calling for a table of negotiation to discuss together, all member states, the value of the medicines and to discuss the uncertainties. Because in that tension that was mentioned several times already between the companies and the payers, it's an issue of mistrust. But we need to move out of it and to recognize that there is a path, that there is doubts about what we know and what we don't know. And that's okay. But we need to have a clear path on how to reduce these uncertainties. And that's through collaboration. And it is through an ecosystem between the companies, the regulators, the HTA, the payers, and the healthcare system itself for the collection of real-world evidence. So a table of negotiation will enable to align the value assessment and then to agree on the uncertainties and the key questions to address in the following years, to also revise the value and price regularly based on new evidence generated, to discuss funding scheme, flexible contract to link the outcome to what is being paid, and to have maybe an initial significant high price for a high reward, but with significant discount during the first years while the additional evidence are being generated. Also to make links sometime to newborn screening in the national healthcare system, because the curative treatment is optimal only with the neonates and not after 1 or 2 years. So diagnostic is key, but also with the selection of the healthcare providers, so to agree on the criteria on which hospital to select to deliver these treatments. And there will be only few across Europe for each of these treatments. And last but not least is that I forgot to mention differential pricing, that there is this different economy level, these 3 or 4 groups in Europe, and we need a differential pricing, and we need to abandon the reference pricing for this narrow market product. So the last point is on the EU co-fund, is that we're calling for the creation of an EU fund to co-fund the generation of evidence post-marketing. So you have this table of negotiation between member states, and together with money from the member states, from the European Commission, the European Union, they co-fund the product to generate this additional evidence. It's still research. And this will be very attractive. Then there is one route. It makes Europe more attractive. It reduces the inequalities of access across Europe. It's an incentive to have joint purchasing. It's an incentive for companies to come to Europe. It's an incentive to go to the rarest diseases and to address unmet medical needs and to support the cutting edge of innovation. Thank you.
Ian, thank you so much. Now we talk with Maria de Graça Carvalho. Good morning. How Ian was saying, there is still quite a number of areas of unmet medical need, like antimicrobial resistance, dementia, rare diseases, or medicine for children. In your opinion, is it possible to join efforts and investment in R&D in such areas like this?
Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you today. And this is, your question is the fundamental point. We arrive now to a time that I think is obvious for all of us that we need to join efforts. We need to join efforts at the level of the fundamental research and more on the application research also, between what is done at European level and at the member states level. We also need to join forces with the outside world, with third countries, through international cooperation in research and innovation. So it's the right time that you advance to build more Europe, to bring more Europe to the health research system. And we have now the opportunity through the new authority that the Commission is going to put forward in the end of this year. And it may be, we don't know yet what is going to be the content. It be a minimal scenario or an ambitious scenario. So we hope for an ambitious scenario that promotes the cooperation on the biomedical research at the European level. It's very important to the rare diseases. Myself, as a rapporteur of Horizon 2020, the European research program that just finished, I have introduced rare disease as a priority that allowed financing many networks at European level and international, with international cooperation. And this is fundamental. It's fundamental for rare diseases. It's fundamental for cancer, is fundamental for cardiovascular diseases and many other areas that is important to work together. And this is one of the lessons of COVID. COVID has shown us, and I was quite proud when I saw one of the slides of Professor Richard Becker that shows the time it took from identification of infection agents to the vaccine, and less than 1 year to COVID, 43 years to Ebola, 16 to hepatitis. And why is that? It's because we had a much better level of preparedness, and we have invested in basic research. And I would always like to give you the example of the BioNTech, and apologize for choosing one case, but it is a vaccine that was, throughout the times, this technology has been co-funded by the European Framework Program. And the last bit was funded by a European research grant from the Horizon 2020. Professor Sahin, the CEO of BioNTech, had a research grant to develop this technology for a cancer vaccine that he, at the center stage, changed to a vaccine against flu. And when the pandemic started, he was ready to apply in a fast way, in a fast-track way to COVID. And this is one of the reasons that was important, that they managed to find a vaccine that has been quite successful and one of the first in the market in a very short term. This shows, is a proof that we need to continue to invest in fundamental research. When this European research grant was attributed, we didn't have a clue that a pandemic like COVID was coming. And so we were investing in the future in solutions that we didn't know yet that we would need. But it was important that we had this knowledge. But this example of the BioNTech also shows the fragilities that we have in Europe, because BioNTech, when it needs to scale up you need to team up with American company, with Pfizer, in order to be able to take the next steps. So in Europe, we need more investment in order to transform knowledge into products and solutions that arrive to the patients and to the patients and to the society itself. We need, as it was already said, a well-prepared ecosystem for innovation in all areas, but especially in health. An ecosystem that enables for a solid investment. We lack investment. That's crucial that we have more investment to develop the results of the fundamental research. We need to eliminate bureaucratic barriers. We have too much bureaucracy in Europe, and we have to fight against the market fragmentation. So we need more Europe also in the market and in the health research and in the health policies. We need to improve the cooperation in scientific research inside the EU and international, as I have said, and also we need to strengthen the public-private cooperation that also has been shown to be very important during the COVID. And there, I'm the rapporteur of the two public-private partnerships, the technology partnerships that are very important in the health sector. One is the successor of the IMI, the Innovative Medicine Initiative. Now it's going to be called Innovative Health Initiative. And I'm also rapporteur of the Global Health Partnership that is the successor of the EDCTP, so the partnerships that is devoted to AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis, that now is going to be more ambitious and to have a larger scope to infectious disease in general. So my main points as a rapporteur, I want these partnerships to cover the whole chain of the product and the medicine development. I want to enhance the international cooperation, not to close Europe. We need to open up. To be the best, we need to be open, and we need to have less bureaucracy. We need to have these partnerships simple and agile. We need agility in Europe. That is one of our disadvantages when compared with the US. We are much less agile. We need to be much agile in all areas, and especially in the health area. My last point is about health data. Is yet another major problem in European Union. We still do not have an efficient system for gathering and sharing data across Europe. Also, inside the member states, I'm talking about Portugal, but the situation is the same in many member states. For example, we are having today still discussions how to handle the information provided by the citizens with the self-testing for the coronavirus, because we lack a centralized way to gather the data and the information. That is very urgent that we organize ourselves at member states level and at the European level. We are building at the European level the infrastructures, and these are another partnerships that I'm rapporteur, the high performance computing that will provide the infrastructure and the potential for data processing, but we need a clear strategy and an organized way to store the data and to share this data. So many things to do. We are very strong in fundamental research with the European programs that have worked well and shown results, but that is not enough. We need to do more in order to make sure that the results that come out of this fundamental research are converted in solutions, medicines, products that are accessible, affordable, efficient, and arrive in a speedy way to our patients and to our citizens. So a lot to do. in the next few years. Thank you.
Indeed, a lot of work to do. Maria de Graça Carvalho, good morning. Thank you so much for your collaboration. Now we're going to talk with Maria do Carmo Fonseca, President of the Board of Institute of Molecular Medicine. Good morning. I have here one question for you. The development of COVID-19 vaccines was very fast and saw unprecedented levels of cooperation between authorities, pharmaceutical companies, the academia as well. What can we learn from this experience, and how can we speed innovation to other diseases, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, can you listen to me? Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Yes. Okay. So first of all, thank you very much for the very kind invitation. I must say that I'm a scientist, an RNA scientist, and by the way, I'm now the president of the RNA, the International RNA Society, and I'm also the president of Biomedical Research Institute. In this regard, I would like to stress what Professor Graça Carvalho already started to point out, which is the importance of fundamental research. Because when we talk about innovation in health, innovation relies on scientific discovery. And scientific discovery is the result of fundamental research. So if we take the case of the RNA vaccine in the BioNTech, in fact, when BioNTech was launched, was founded, it was already at the level of innovation. It had already been fed by a long process of biological fundamental discovery in RNA biology. And that's what I really mean about fundamental research, is upstream of all innovation process. So I think it is extremely important that when we talk about innovation in health, we keep in mind that we cannot forget about what feeds the pipeline for innovation. We must ensure that Europe remains leader in basic fundamental research. And for that, we need to keep very close attention to the investment that the different member states and the European Commission is doing at the fundamental research level. And here, I would like to stress that there is still a lot of inequalities between the different countries. People, young people, wanting to become scientists, working in different European countries, they do not have the same access, the same level of access to the most cutting-edge, advanced institutions, infrastructures that are critical to advance basic knowledge. So I would like to convey a single, simple, but I think very important message to this forum, now that we are talking about priorities for the Portuguese presidency. I would like to really harness the importance of fundamental research funding in Europe, not only through Horizon Europe, because this program is set and there is a space for fundamental research. We can discuss that it has been the relative importance of fundamental research at European programs is always much less than innovation, because there is this idea that fundamental research should be primarily funded by the national member states, so the national governments. But because there is so much inequality there, I think that it's mandatory for Europe as a whole, as a body, not only a collection of different countries. It's important to think about this problem and not just leave it to say, well, fundamental research is up to the individual member states to take care at their universities, at their national universities, their national research centers, and so on. I think it's important to discuss these globally so that we can have more coordination of the relative weight of fundamental research funding at the national level, together with the European collaborative efforts. Otherwise, we will continue to have strong inequalities in Europe, and I'm sure that that's what we are all here against. We don't want to have inequalities in Europe.
Why is the dialogue so difficult, in your opinion?
The dialogue is difficult because there are different mindsets. The mindset of industry is very much focused on a result that can become an application. Like a very good example is the BioNTech vaccine. They were not, obviously, as Professor Garcia Carvalho already mentioned, several years ago, they had this idea of using RNA biology to turn it into a vaccine. But they could do it because there was a lot of knowledge about RNA. And so it was already, the proof of principle was already established, and now it was just a matter of innovation, of how to turn this knowledge into an application, into a product. In the mindset of the people that do innovation, in the mindset of the people that do manufacturing and scaling up in clinical trials and so on, is completely different from the basic scientist that is trying to understand how nature works, how the human body works, what causes diseases. These are completely different types of people, and they normally don't talk to each other. And I think this is part of the problem. So I was very happy that I was invited to come to this forum where most of the people are more concerned with innovation. And I'm bringing up the issue of fundamental research upstream of innovation.
That's why your presence here was so important to all of us. Maria do Carmo Fonseca, thank you so much. Good morning. And once more, thank also to the other three guests we had in this last discussion. Voltamos ao português agora que terminamos estes painéis, bem mais confortável para todos nós, pelo menos para mim. João Almeida Lopes, estamos aqui de volta, esteve aqui no início para dar as boas-vindas a esta sessão. Foi uma manhã muito produtiva, na sua opinião, em termos de discussão em torno deste assunto?
Acho que sim, a minha opinião é claramente suspeita, não é? Nós fomos, de alguma maneira, os organizadores, os impulsionadores da conferência, mas eu diria que supera as nossas expectativas. Acho que, de facto, as intervenções foram muito boas. Acho que ficámos claramente com a ideia que, de alguma maneira, estamos todos alinhados nestes objetivos comuns, de facto, de não deixar ninguém para trás, de facto, não podemos deixar pessoas nem doentes para trás. Temos que encontrar, sobretudo na Europa, temos que encontrar mecanismos e agilizar, flexibilizar os regulamentos, tudo aquilo que, de alguma maneira, acaba por causar faltas de equidade no acesso à inovação. Acho que essa é uma matéria que
encontrar aqui um equilíbrio entre quem faz a pesquisa e a investigação e quem está do lado da indústria farmacêutica. De todas as intervenções que fomos ouvindo ao longo da manhã, houve tónicas neste ponto da necessidade de um maior entendimento e de se falar a mesma língua, de um maior diálogo. É por aí o caminho?
Só pode ser por aí. Só pode ser pela colaboração, ao fim e ao cabo estarmos todos sentados à mesa. Acho que, de alguma maneira, se a pandemia nos ensinou alguma coisa, foi que, de facto, é necessário colaborarmos, é necessário termos todos os intervenientes sentados à mesa, as indústrias, a academia, os reguladores, as entidades governamentais, as associações de doentes, e é por isso que, de alguma maneira, propusemos desde o início que pudéssemos avançar para um fórum de alto nível, não é? Que também já foi proposto por algumas associações de doentes, em que de facto todos nos encontrássemos abertamente a propor soluções, a encontrar soluções nós não queremos ter faltas de equidade na Europa, não é? Queremos uma Europa que é um espaço muito grande, não podemos permitir que a Europa fique atrás do bloco americano. A verdade é que tem ficado. Infelizmente, vimos no caso das vacinas, as vacinas acabaram por ser aprovadas mais depressa nos Estados Unidos que na Europa. Acho que é uma coisa que temos que nos bater em termos de timing, a aprovação da inovação, para que ninguém fique para trás, para que haja de facto equidade. A aprovação da inovação tem que ser feita rapidamente. Não podemos sequer, ou não devemos ter, faltas de equidade dentro do território europeu. Não é aceitável que, em alguns países, a inovação seja posta à disposição dos doentes em 2 ou 3 meses e noutros países leve mais de 2 anos. Não é possível. Imagino, por exemplo, que nós estávamos à espera das vacinas em Portugal 2 anos relativamente a outros países, isso seria completamente inaceitável. Portanto, o que nos move é claramente equidade, equilíbrio, sustentabilidade, resiliência, e isso, obviamente, em última análise e a médio prazo, claramente que vai aumentar a competitividade da Europa, do espaço europeu, do território europeu.
Esse é o ponto principal da plataforma permanente de diálogo e cooperação no seio da saúde de que fala?
Exatamente. De facto, como se viu, é possível estarmos sentados à mesa, entidades privadas, empresas privadas, a academia, as instituições técnicas e científicas, as entidades governamentais, as autoridades reguladoras. Tem com certeza que haver denominadores comuns no sentido de garantir mais equidade, que não se dupliquem. Aliás, vimos algumas intervenções esta manhã nesse sentido, que haja avaliações que sejam de alguma maneira, sejam a face visível de um mecanismo europeu, verdadeiramente europeu, de uma política de saúde europeia, equilibrada, abrangente, global, no espaço europeu. Acho que é isso que nos move, e isso claramente permitiria flexibilizar os mecanismos, termos uma regulação, eu diria, mais consistente entre todos os países, o que permitiria, obviamente, o acesso à inovação e à equidade aos cidadãos europeus de uma maneira bastante mais uniforme.
Portanto, seria esse o contributo prático deste fórum multilateral de alto nível?
Acho que se conseguirmos, de facto, dar forma, conseguir empurrar para a frente esta ideia do fórum de alto nível, estaremos a prestar um bom serviço à Europa, aos cidadãos europeus, aos doentes europeus, para que de facto não fique ninguém para trás, que é, como sabe, o lema desta conferência, o ponto de partida destas intervenções todas.
Referiu a necessidade de assegurar a equidade no acesso de produtos inovadores entre os diferentes países europeus. Ora, este foi um dos pontos críticos que nós abordamos aqui ao longo desta manhã e, de facto, praticamente todos os especialistas identificaram esta questão como um problema. Porquê que é assim?
Porque, de facto, não há uma política europeia global, digamos, sintetizada, abrangente. Ou seja, não é que as regras não sejam as mesmas, mas a verdade é que o facto de haver determinado tipo de independência, de autonomia, apesar de tudo, de filosofias e escolas às vezes diferentes de país para país, acabam por causar disfunções em termos do tempo em que os doentes possam começar a ter acesso à inovação. Porque a inovação, eu acho que estamos todos de acordo com a inovação, a Europa está de acordo com a inovação, todas as entidades, é fundamental continuar a ter incentivos para a inovação, já temos alguns e é preciso mantê-los, se calhar aumentá-los, a pandemia veio demonstrar isso. Mas a questão é que a inovação, após ser aprovada, ela na verdade tem que chegar aos doentes, daí a ideia, não ficar ninguém para trás. Se a inovação não chega aos doentes, estamos muito perto de um exercício académico. Eu tenho que fazer chegar a inovação aos doentes, isso é fundamental. Portanto, eu não posso ter diferenças abissais de país para país. Reparámos todos agora, quando foi esta questão das vacinas nos últimos meses, de alguma maneira, o mundo incendiado, onde é que está a minha cota-parte de vacinas e os senhores ao lado já têm e que ainda não temos. E isto não pode acontecer, não é? Nós temos, de facto, como sociedade, temos que ser muito equitativos, temos que criar regras, temos que todos encontrar soluções para que, de facto, a inovação, aquilo que vem satisfazer as necessidades ainda não satisfeitas em saúde, tudo isso tem que chegar o mais rapidamente possível aos doentes que necessitam dessas inovações. E as diferenças de país para país, de território para território, diga-se até da Europa para os Estados Unidos, não podem ser assim tão diferentes.
Infelizmente ainda existem.
Há muito caminho a fazer e por isso o Fórum de Alto Nível achamos que pode ser claramente um marco importante nessa matéria.
Disse que é importante reconhecer o papel dos agentes económicos na saúde, na recuperação económica da Europa no período pós-Covid-19. A saúde é a economia?
A saúde, eu diria, é muito mais economia do que nós pensamos. Quando estamos a falar em inovação, por exemplo, às vezes esquecemos que, por exemplo, num país como Portugal, as publicações científicas em saúde são claramente as que dominam o mundo científico, digamos assim. Depois é a questão em termos de criação de emprego, a questão do impacto económico, não só dos medicamentos, mas dos diagnósticos, do diagnóstico atempado, dos tratamentos atempados. Todos esses aspectos acabam por ter um efeito extraordinário na sociedade. A APIFARMA levou a cabo, com a colaboração da McKinsey há cerca de 2 anos, um estudo sobre o valor do medicamento que é bem evidente. Ou seja, independentemente, ou para além, muito para além daquilo que é importantíssimo, que é de facto os doentes serem tratados e verem as suas moleitas aliviadas, vivermos mais e vivermos melhor, mas a verdade é que isso acaba por ter um impacto na economia que por vezes não sabemos avaliar bem, e esse trabalho da McKinsey que referi foi claramente lapidar nesse aspecto. Toda a indústria de saúde acaba por ter um impacto fortíssimo na economia. Não há nenhum país do mundo com uma economia extremamente forte onde a saúde não seja também extremamente forte.
E é outra das mensagens que levamos aqui desta sessão esta manhã. João Almeida Lopes, muito obrigado por nos ter acompanhado ao longo de toda a manhã e pelos contributos também bastante importantes para esta discussão. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado.
E nós seguimos, porque estamos quase a chegar ao fim para a sessão de encerramento. Vamos ter aqui 3 intervenções também, todas elas muito importantes, relacionadas com este tema. A primeira vai ser de Andrea Riz, diretor para os sistemas de saúde, produtos médicos e inovação da Direção-Geral de Saúde e Segurança Alimentar da Comissão Europeia, que já aqui está ao meu lado. Muito bom dia. Não é o Andrei Riz, pelo menos foi a indicação que me deram, não. Mas está aqui connosco ou não? Está connosco onde? Está connosco online. Está connosco online, pronto, eu não tinha essa indicação. André Riz, muito bom dia. Vamos então à sua intervenção nesta sessão de encerramento. Nós não estamos a ouvir, eu pelo menos aqui não o estou a ouvir. Provavelmente tem o microfone do seu aparelho desligado. Confirme lá. Agora sim. Perfeito.
Okay. Good morning. It's really a pleasure to be with you today. I heard a number of previous speakers and issues raised. Most of them I can fully subscribe. Of course, we still continue debate. And I like the point when one of the speakers said, let's agree about the facts and look for the solutions. So I hope we are in the momentum that we have so many important reports, analysis, and debates that now it's time for action. So this is why European Commission proposed the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe, which was adopted by the Commission in November last year. It was not triggered by pandemic because we started this work earlier. We have seen a number of problems related to access to medicine, shortages, way we should keep innovations in Europe and build up the ecosystem which allowed, develop innovations, but also employ innovations in the healthcare systems. But it's also true that COVID put additional light, for our work, and which was also shown in one of the presentations that we really have to use this opportunity to gather to the lessons learned to COVID and see what we can use in the future to make our system better and work better. So we see now that in the long term vision of the system, we should think, how we should be crisis resilience, but also future proof, responding to the challenges of the future, not just today. It will this important package of number of legislative proposal, future legislative proposal, but also actions we propose, start a number of areas of work already now. We focus on four main areas. The first one is how to improve the patient's access to affordable medicines. I think it was discussed already today in the panel. How to make sure that innovations is meeting unmet needs and how we can increase and push innovation. The thirdly, how to build an open strategic autonomy by taking steps to address shortages of medicines and develop the more resilience and diversification of supply chains. We got very serious lessons from this pandemic, how supply chains are fragile, but at the same time global, and it's important to see what is the European response and what is the policy behind this development. And finally, the fourth pillar is to promote EU competitiveness at global level and assure the level playing field for EU operators. We live on the global scene. The number of areas we can compare. Today we heard about the regulatory comparisons between US or Europe. We have heard also about the different markets growing, and having weaknesses and strengths, US, China, Europe. I think we can build on strengths, but of course we should also take, how to reduce our weaknesses in the field. So what we also learned from COVID, maybe just few lessons learned. We learn, but we also respond somehow. So we understood, for example, that we need to strengthen the European level of cooperation. I mean, the clear message from our cooperation, as Natalie Moll said, we have excellent cooperation during this period. But also we learned that the governments and the role of the European Medicine Agency, European Centre for Disease Control should be strengthened, but also the decision process taken by member states and the Commission should be also better done. So this is why the package of European Health Union was triggered end of November last year. We proposed recently. We are discussing this in the Council under the leadership of Portuguese presidency, and also in the Parliament. We also announced the new instrument we'd like to develop for European Union called HERA, which is our way to build the infrastructure to respond to the crisis like this. It's based on some experience of US BARDA, but of course we have to adapt to European concept. We just now published Inception Impact Assessment to present the options of how we would like to build this future organization. So everybody is welcome to provide additional input. But what already we are doing to respond to the potential problems with the variants of viruses and future production of vaccines needed to respond to this challenge, we propose a so-called HERA incubator, which is a number of initiatives addressing the challenges we may face and basically respond now, not to wait for the next year when hopefully agency will be established and we will finalize this project. And I finish on the lessons learned. So first lessons is governance. So it's how we coordinate across Europe. We understood for example the way the clinical trials were set up, often nationally, often very locally, without good coordination. So the results of the clinical trials, even in goodwill, set up, but to compare them, to build on the results was very difficult. Other, of course, important area was the supply of medicines to the European Union. The very critical lessons was about the ICU medicines, when we understood, the nationalism, going to the national solution is not always, helping, because, the situation, the shortages are, specific medicines are coming. We need to be united. We need to cooperate and respond together, because this fire blanket is often, should be put on the place when we have fire, and to help each other. And we see now is how discussion is going on, for example, to share the vaccines, between countries. They are in bigger needs now than others. So it's positive lessons already. Security of supply chain, this was something we learned a lot. We learned that it could be because of the sanitary decisions, public health decisions, like in China, when the production was stopped because of the closing factories. But also we have political decisions by the Indian government. We have also distribution problems, the different national decisions, stopping, for example, APIs transfer between countries, stockpiling of medicines that were not available in other countries. So I think we need to really understand how to manage shortages, globally, but also in the Europe.
Thank you so much.
We had a lot of discussion today. And finally, this is my last word on international cooperation. International cooperation was across industry, across science, and across regulators. And I think this is the strong message we should leave also today, that this international cooperation is needed, and there's also somehow vaccine development and the cooperation. This field showed that working together makes sense, for all of us, but also for our citizens and patients. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I apologize for introducing you in Portuguese, but I had no information that your communication was supposed to be in English. Thank you so much for your presentation. And now we go to speak in Portuguese from now on, porque o próximo convidado, a indicação que eu tenho é que vai fazer esta comunicação em português. Rui Santos Ivo, Presidente do Conselho Diretivo do Infarmed, a Autoridade Nacional do Medicamento e Produtos de Saúde, que nos vai fazer também uma pequena comunicação nesta cerimónia de encerramento. Bom dia.
João, muito bom dia, muito obrigado por me dar a palavra.
Rui Santos Ivo, eu vou-lhe pedir que ligue o microfone da sua câmara, que eu presumo que está desligado. Pelo menos eu aqui não estou a ouvi-lo. Estou a vê-lo, mas não a ouvi-lo. Está a ouvir-me? Não sei se vai ser possível retomarmos este contacto. Ficámos sem imagem de vídeo, pelo que me dizem, não é possível. Portanto, nós vamos falar com o Secretário de Estado. Temos indicação, temos condições ou não de falar com o Rui Santos Ivo? Vamos aguardar só aqui alguns segundos, um pequeno compasso de espera para saber se há condições para termos esta participação do Presidente do Conselho Diretivo do Infarmed nesta cerimónia de encerramento desta sessão, que começou às 9 da manhã e vai terminar nos próximos minutos. Eu creio que não há condições, portanto vamos falar com o Secretário de Estado da Saúde, a quem tenho mais uma vez que pedir, da Saúde não, peço desculpa, da Adjunto e da Economia, a quem tenho mais uma vez que pedir desculpas. Foram mais de 20 convidados ao longo das últimas 3 horas, muitos deles presencialmente, outros como as regras atualmente exigem à distância, e todos numa sequência muito, muito rápida, e há pouco peço desculpa por o terem apresentado como a pessoa que eu tinha aqui no alinhamento a seguir. O que é que nos quer dizer? Que palavras é que nos quer deixar aqui no encerramento desta sessão?
Bem, em primeiro lugar, um agradecimento à APIFARMA e à AFP por organizarem esta conferência num momento como nós vivemos, numa situação pandémica como na nossa vida com certeza não tínhamos experiência. E também no contexto da presidência portuguesa da União Europeia, eu julgo que ela vem em bom momento para um debate alargado sobre o valor da inovação e sobre o impacto social e económico da mesma, e também sobre a discussão à volta da questão da resiliência e da construção de uma autonomia estratégica da Europa em produtos tão importantes para a nossa vida comum como os produtos de saúde, nomeadamente os medicamentos, mas no seu conjunto das diversas áreas dos produtos de saúde. Historicamente, nós temos claro que os medicamentos e os restantes produtos de saúde têm uma importância muito grande na nossa vida. Desde meados do século passado, a esperança de vida aumentou muitíssimo, e isso deve-se não apenas às condições de vida, obviamente, mas também ao impacto daquilo que foi a afirmação, nomeadamente dos antibióticos e de um conjunto de produtos que revolucionaram a capacidade de respondermos às doenças que afligiam, digamos, que a vida das pessoas e das populações ao nível mundial e nomeadamente na Europa. A esperança média de vida cresceu 20 anos em pouco mais de meio século e, portanto, isto é um dado concreto da importância que tem a inovação em produtos de saúde para a nossa vida cotidiana. E quando vivemos uma pandemia, ainda temos uma percepção mais exata da importância de termos uma resposta muito rápida àquilo que são as condições que resultam das circunstâncias que vivemos. A capacidade da indústria farmacêutica de ter no mercado, de desenvolver e de colocar no mercado vacinas que em média demoram entre 8 a 10 anos e que nós conseguimos assistir em poucos meses a encontrar respostas que são muito afirmativas da afirmação da capacidade de inovação da indústria farmacêutica, é muito relevante e não podemos senão dar os parabéns à indústria pela capacidade de responder tão rapidamente àquilo que nós fomos vivendo. Evidentemente com dificuldades, com problemas e com dúvidas que sempre se colocam num desenvolvimento tão rápido de produtos com esta importância e com esta magnitude. Mas o esforço da indústria, conjugado com os Estados-membros da União Europeia, mas com os outros blocos económicos para ajudar a construir respostas rápidas a uma situação pandémica, é obviamente um aspecto muito decisivo para que possamos viver com a tranquilidade da nossa vida cotidiana. Mas a inovação em produtos de saúde e em medicamentos tem que ser vista também do ponto de vista económico, não apenas do ponto de vista social, das respostas sociais, mas também do valor que ela traz para aqueles Estados, para aqueles territórios que ao longo da União Europeia e ao longo do mundo conseguem concentrar em si as diferentes fases da cadeia logística da produção de medicamentos e de respostas em saúde. Quem tem condições de, por um lado, favorecer a instalação de centros de investigação, de centros de produção das suas diferentes componentes, esse valor económico da concentração em territórios muito importantes para a dinâmica da economia no seu conjunto, tem com certeza melhores condições de afrontar também os problemas económicos que decorrem de uma pandemia. E nós vimos aí a dificuldade da União Europeia no domínio daquilo que são as cadeias de valor do medicamento. Há 20 anos, a União Europeia era o espaço de afirmação da inovação no mundo. E progressivamente nós vimos assistindo a alguma desvalorização do papel da União Europeia naquilo que é a construção de produtos inovadores em saúde, para outras geografias, em primeiro lugar para os Estados Unidos, mas obviamente para outros espaços geográficos ainda mais longínquos do centro da União Europeia. E isso tem consequências na capacidade de resposta que nas circunstâncias que nós vivemos, tivemos para ter o mais rápido possível, em confronto com os outros blocos económicos, com outras geografias, as vacinas e, naturalmente, os medicamentos que se vão seguir para responder às dificuldades que estamos a sentir. Houve um debate, que é um debate ainda atual, sobre a boa e má inovação. E isso diz um pouco daquilo que era o mainstream à volta da discussão sobre a inovação em produtos de saúde. Entre aquilo que é a inovação incremental e a inovação radical. Ambas têm um papel na construção de novas soluções que respondam às necessidades das pessoas. Evidentemente, quando estamos a falar de inovação radical, ela responde a doenças sobre as quais não existem ainda respostas curativas, mas o valor da inovação incremental no bem-estar das populações, no bem-estar ao longo da vida, não apenas nos períodos em que somos mais fortes, mas também nos períodos em que somos mais débeis, na velhice, e em que, portanto, as circunstâncias da nossa vida são distintas. Esse valor da inovação incremental tem que ser valorizado, efetivamente, naquilo que é a capacidade dos Estados-membros poderem, em articulação com a indústria, encontrar soluções que permitam a um preço justo encontrar respostas rápidas para os problemas. E esse debate sobre o valor da inovação é um debate que hoje ainda é mais importante, porque vivendo uma pandemia nós temos com certeza maiores dificuldades. E é esse o debate sobre o valor da inovação que se tem que cruzar também com o papel da construção de cadeias logísticas mais fortes na Europa, o papel da autonomia estratégica. No mundo global, quando as cadeias logísticas são muito alongadas e vivemos tempos disruptivos, evidentemente temos mais dificuldades para encontrar soluções rápidas. A crise que nós vivemos no canal de Suez na semana passada é bem demonstrativa das dificuldades de cadeias logísticas muito alongadas. E, portanto, mesmo em mercados abertos, que é um valor não apenas Portugal, mas também para a União Europeia, porque globalmente a União Europeia é uma economia exportadora, virada para a exportação, em que o valor dos mercados abertos é muito importante, mas mesmo nesse contexto é importante termos aquilo que pode responder a situações pandémicas como vivemos ou a situações disruptivas nas cadeias de produção. E esse é um debate que também cruzou este seminário que nós todos consideramos muito relevante para o nosso futuro. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado pelo seu contributo, que praticamente fecha esta sessão, mas vamos ainda ouvir naquela videochamada que há pouco perdemos o Presidente do Conselho Diretivo do Infarmed, Rui Santos Ivo. Agora creio que está em condições de falar connosco.
Sim, João Moreira, consegue-me ouvir?
Perfeitamente.
Então, todos estarão a ouvir, muito obrigado, peço desculpa desta limitação e peço também a vossa compreensão para o facto de não poder estar aí, porque era a minha intenção fazê-lo, mas por razões aqui de reuniões que estão a decorrer não me foi possível. Eu queria começar por cumprimentar o Sr. Secretário de Estado Adjunto da Economia, o Dr. João Neves, saudar também o Diretor para o Sistema de Saúde, Produtos Médicos e Inovação da Direção-Geral da Saúde da Comissão Europeia, o André Reis, com muito gosto também que eu vejo hoje aqui, e obviamente cumprimentar o Dr. João Almeida Lopes e em nome dele também a APIFARMA e todos os presentes nesta conferência que decorreu. Dizer obviamente que me associo a ela com muito gosto e felicitar quer a APIFARMA quer a FPIA por a terem organizado. Provavelmente o que vou dizer também já foi referido pelos que me antecederam e que ouvi agora ao Sr. Secretário de Estado e evidentemente que as questões que referiu, enfim, estando aqui um bocadinho a ultrapassar o protocolo por estar a falar depois dele, mas evidentemente que estaremos na linha das questões que eu acabei de ouvir. É evidente que a Covid nos colocou a todos, colocou-nos e está a colocar-nos à prova e, portanto, desafia-nos a procurar encontrar soluções inovadoras que possam responder não apenas às questões de agora, mas também que perspectivem novas soluções para o futuro, e penso que foi isso também que hoje aqui foi debatido. Esta motivação, como sabem, está bem patente também na atuação europeia e nacional, e é o mote da nossa presidência da União Europeia, tempo de agir. Vimos esta conferência também como um sinal de que a indústria farmacêutica se encontra mobilizada para não apenas para enfrentar estes desafios, mas também para pensar no futuro e encontrar novas soluções que possam evitar constrangimentos que todos sentimos e que agora foram mencionados pelo Sr. Secretário de Estado. Eu aqui gostava de assinalar de dois aspectos muito importantes. Um deles tem a ver com a forma eficiente com que nós em Farmed contamos com a colaboração da indústria neste tempo que vai de pandemia, com a indústria e também com os demais agentes da cadeia de valor do medicamento, distribuidores, farmácias, profissionais de saúde. Julgo que conseguimos dar uma boa resposta à disponibilização dos medicamentos e também dos dispositivos médicos, ainda que, quanto a estes, na fase inicial da pandemia, todos tenhamos sentido os constrangimentos que foram progressivamente sendo ultrapassados. Também ficou bem patente a necessidade de encontrarmos soluções para alguns dos constrangimentos que ainda que não tenham impactado decisivamente na nossa resposta, mostraram como havia vulnerabilidades que importa ultrapassar, e são vários dos pontos que nós neste momento estamos precisamente a enfrentar, nomeadamente a distribuição de matérias-primas e a capacidade produtiva na União Europeia. Também queria aqui fazer referência, para além desta colaboração que reputo muito essencial e muito positiva, também fazer referência a dois aspectos que também já foram agora aludidos pelo Sr. Secretário de Estado e que têm a ver com a distribuição das vacinas. Julgo que foram introduzidos dois mecanismos extremamente importantes, um que tem a ver com a avaliação, conseguirmos as autoridades do medicamento, com a Agência Europeia de Medicamentos, em tempo curto conseguir colocar estas vacinas à nossa disposição e estão agora a ser utilizadas por todos os países, não só na União Europeia, mas também noutros países. E o segundo aspecto tem a ver com o processo de aquisição, em que foi possível, à escala da União Europeia, conseguir pôr de pé um processo conjunto de aquisição das vacinas. Não me vou, obviamente, referir a aspectos que têm vindo agora sobre a cadência da chegada das vacinas, mas é muito importante que este processo tenha sido conseguido, porque garante que todos os países da União Europeia estão em pé de igualdade em termos de poderem receber as vacinas que necessitamos. Gostava de aproveitar ainda esta oportunidade também para fazer aqui alguma referência às nossas prioridades em termos de presidência, alguns aspectos que reputo importante. Desde logo, no âmbito da presidência, temos como prioridade tudo o que tem a ver com o acesso sustentável, equitativo e universal ao medicamento, obviamente onde está tudo o que tem a ver com inovação, e isso vai ser visto ao longo da nossa, ainda dos próximos meses da presidência. Aqui também destacaria e referiria algo que também já foi agora mencionado, que é a importância de aumentarmos a resiliência das cadeias de abastecimento a nível europeu, nomeadamente reforçando a capacidade de fabrico e da autonomia da União Europeia para a disponibilidade dos medicamentos. Na nossa presidência há um enfoque nesta abordagem, aqui em ligação com a estratégia farmacêutica que a Comissão Europeia propôs, e penso que o André Reis terá falado. Já desenvolvemos um conjunto de reuniões sobre estes temas e iremos ter a oportunidade de continuar a discutir. Também gostava de fazer referência a um aspecto que é muito relevante, e uma das conquistas que identifico da presidência portuguesa, que foi o desbloquearmos ao nível do Conselho da União Europeia a discussão em torno do regulamento da avaliação de tecnologias de saúde, o regulamento HTA. Foi possível, no passado mês, obter da parte dos Estados-membros da União Europeia um mandato para prosseguir este processo com o Parlamento Europeu e podermos vir a ver materializada a criação de um quadro europeu de avaliação de tecnologias de saúde, certamente em benefício dos doentes e dos nossos concidadãos. É um caminho decisivo para a avaliação de tecnologias de saúde, E agora esperamos que esta etapa final em que o Parlamento, o Conselho e a Comissão em conjunto terão a oportunidade de finalizar, e eu espero que isso seja possível ainda durante a nossa presidência. Aproveito aqui para agradecer a colaboração da Comissão através do André Reis. Este regulamento é um importante instrumento de cooperação europeia na área do acesso aos novos medicamentos, já foi aqui bastante falado, e seguramente será também um contributo para melhorar a eficiência e o aproveitamento dos recursos em termos de avaliação e assegurar um acesso também mais equitativo a nível da União. Também na mesma linha de atuação, estamos a dar prioridade às propostas no âmbito do chamado pacote da União Europeia para a Saúde. No nosso caso, iremos focar-nos no reforço do mandato da Agência Europeia de Medicamentos e aqui, sobretudo, no sentido de materializar muitas das práticas que pusemos de pé durante a pandemia e que se pretendem que agora venham a fazer parte, digamos, da normalidade dos instrumentos que queremos ter à nossa disposição. No fundo, criarem mecanismos mais estruturais que não tínhamos e que agora estamos a poder concretizar. Ainda também uma referência, e não me querendo alongar, à conferência que o Ministério da Saúde e o Infarmed vão realizar no dia 29 e 30 de abril, uma conferência que irá contar também com a participação dos vários parceiros, incluindo aqui a Federação Europeia da Indústria Farmacêutica, a FPIA, e muitos outros, dos sistemas de saúde, das agências reguladoras, das várias áreas, profissionais de saúde. É uma conferência, no fundo, onde vamos querer aprofundar a temática da disponibilidade dos medicamentos e dos dispositivos médicos, associado também a outros temas de atualidade, como foram aqui hoje mencionados, a acessibilidade e a sustentabilidade. Com esta conferência nós pretendemos identificar propostas e prioridades que possam vir a ser traduzidas em conclusões do Conselho da União Europeia, e assim ser também um contributo substantivo para as discussões futuras que vão continuar a ocorrer e que estão muito ligadas às propostas que a Comissão Europeia está a colocar no quadro da estratégia farmacêutica. Esta conferência, no fundo, irá abordar vários dos aspectos que já foram aqui referidos, a questão da autonomia estratégica, a robustez das cadeias de distribuição, as questões que têm a ver com a transparência da cadeia de valor do medicamento, a acessibilidade aos medicamentos, todos esses aspectos irão fazer parte desta discussão e contamos com a participação de todos. Finalizaria apenas referindo que todos estes temas continuam a ser temas incontornáveis no futuro próximo de ser vizinha e, portanto, não será demais que essa discussão continue a ser feita de forma integrada e de forma conjunta, no fundo, no sentido também de construirmos uma Europa que seja mais resiliente, mais justa e social. Mantermos unidos em torno destes objetivos é um objetivo essencial e penso que todos comungamos disso. Claro que se continuamos a contar com a vossa participação e os vossos contributos também para estes desiderados. Mais uma vez agradeço a oportunidade de poder estar convosco nesta conferência, felicitando novamente a sua organização. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado também pela sua participação, assim como a participação de todos os intervenientes nesta conferência, uma vez mais a presença do Sr. Secretário de Estado Adjunto e da Economia. Esta conferência fica por aqui. Agradecemos também, para além de todos os participantes e das suas intervenções, a todos aqueles que nos acompanharam online ao longo das últimas 3 horas. Informo que irá estar disponível em breve toda a documentação da conferência de hoje no site da APIFARMA em www.apifarma.pt. A próxima conferência será sobre oncologia. Cada dia conta, da prioridade à ação, e vai acontecer no dia 26 de maio. Muito boa tarde.